Chapter 182. Foundation building cultivators were considered good cultivators in the current cultivation world, but in ancient times when great cultivators roamed freely, they were no different from ants. Chinga stared at the divine dragon monument in front of her. For the first time she felt she was so small that she was nothing more than a drop of water in this vast ocean. The ocean was so vast that she would disappear in the water with just a wave. This was the spiritual aura pressure of an ancient divine beast, although it was only a little bit of its aura. Not to mention foundation building cultivators, even nascent soul cultivators couldn't resist this kind of spiritual aura pressure. Junior Martial Brother Yi. Upon hearing Jiang Shanghang's voice, Chinga regained her composure and said with a sigh, "No wonder it's called the Divine Dragon's Breath. It's so powerful," Jiang Shanghang said. "If Junior Martial Brother Yi enters the underground palace, you'll find that the Divine Dragon's breath inside is even more powerful. An even more powerful Divine Dragon's breath." Chinga muttered. An even more powerful Divine Dragon's breath proved that the underground palace wasn't an ordinary place. It might even be extremely dangerous. What kind of treasure could make Ren Yufeng plot against her before even entering? Forget it. I won't think about it anymore. Let's go inside first. Chinga looked around then asked Jiang Shanghang, "Senior Martial Brother Jiang, where's the entrance to the underground palace?" Jiang Shanghang led her around the Divine Dragon Monument and saw a dark hole on the flat ground. If one didn't pay attention they might think it was a hole dug by some undersea fish and shrimp. "Here?" Jiang Shanghang said, "This hole definitely wasn't opened with a real technique. Maybe it was attracted by the same Divine Dragon's breath here, so it was exposed." Many secret places were hidden and unknown in the beginning, but nothing could resist the passage of time. Slowly the original power would fade away, and this underground palace was probably the same. The two of them checked their belongings. Once they were ready, Jiang Shanghang walked in front and they slowly sank into the entrance of the underground palace. The dark space and narrow stone passage were no different from the underground palace on land. As soon as they entered the underground palace, their minds went blank for a moment because the aura of the divine dragon was even denser. This kind of sacred and boundless aura, which carried with it an ancient pressure, caused little cultivators like them to tremble with fear. After silently adjusting her breath for a while, Chinga finally calmed down. Even under the effect of the soul-refining art, she still felt deeply awed. Jiang Shanghang had the same expression on his face. He said softly, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, be careful. This path isn't the correct entrance. There might be a trap." Chinga asked, "Where did you go last time?" "Last time, apart from Senior Martial Brother Rin, we only made it this far." As they spoke, they passed through the long stone path and entered a stone room. This stone chamber was extremely high, deep and vast. There was no longer any light from the entrance, and they could not see the end of it with only a few moonstones. There was nothing else in the stone room. It did not look like a hall, nor did it look like a hall. It seemed to be just a slightly wider stone path. "Turns out that water carp beast lived here. I wonder how many years it's been here," Jiang Shanghang said as he slowly swam to the four walls to examine them. Chinga said, "Based on the appearance of this stone room, it's at least 10,000 years old. That water carp beast was only in the 5th rank. No matter how long it lived, it couldn't have lived for more than 10,000 years, right?" Jiang Shanghang was startled, but he soon nodded. "That's right. Could it be that the water carp beast isn't from the underground palace?" "It's possible. Didn't you say it completely disregarded the restrictions around the Divine Dragon Monument?" The two of them glanced at each other and were silent again. If the water carp beast wasn't the spiritual beast guarding this underground palace, then this underground palace either didn't have any spiritual beast guarding it, or it was much more dangerous than the water carp beast. If it was the former, it would be easy to deal with. They only needed to keep moving forward and kill Ren Yufeng. But if it was the latter, it wasn't a place foundation building cultivators like them could barge into. They would instead lose their lives for nothing. The two of them pondered for a while. Jiang Shanghang was the first one who couldn't help but ask, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, what do you think about this matter?" Chinga muttered to herself and said slowly, "In fact, there's nothing to be afraid of. The 8 of them are walking in the front. If there's any danger we can just retreat quickly. Wouldn't that be fine?" In fact, what she was thinking was that they wouldn't have no time to enter the virtual sky world, right? Jiang Shanghang's cultivation level was lower than hers, so she had several ways to knock him out in an instant then bring him into the virtual sky world. Jiang Shanghang hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded. "You're right. Then should we follow them?" and we'll walk for a while first. If we're sure there's no danger, we'll go somewhere else." Jiang Shanghong nodded in agreement. The two of them set off again. This indeed wasn't a stone room, it was a spacious stone path. This stone path was very long. They walked slowly for a long time, but they still hadn't reached the end. Fortunately, there were traces left by the 8 people ahead of them along the way. They didn't dare to use their fleeing technique. First, they were afraid they'd be discovered by the other 8 people. Second, they were worried there might be some dangers along the way. Judging from the traces along the way, the 8 people ahead of them also went through several battles, but their opponents weren't demonic beasts. Instead, they seemed to have encountered some traps and the path had collapsed. Fortunately, with these people leading the way, Mo Qingge and Jiang Shanghong didn't encounter any danger along the way. After walking in silence for a while, they finally entered a large hall. The tall, heavy stone door was half open. There were dragon patterns engraved on it that looked like the Divine Dragon Monument. After stepping through the door, they saw towering stone pillars supporting the entire hall. The floor was covered with neat stone slabs, all of which were painted with the same shape of a dragon. As they slowly walked inside, a towering stone statue gradually appeared in the darkness. Antlers, bull's horns, camel's head, rabbit's eyes, snake's neck, sea serpent's belly, fish's scales, and eagle's claws. Its imposing manner was vast, as if it could reach the sky. Divine Dragon Statue. There was actually a divine dragon statue enshrined in this hall. Mo Qingge and Jiang Shanghong glanced at each other. Both of them were speechless. The imposing manner of this divine dragon statue was even stronger than the Divine Dragon Monument. This kind of spiritual aura pressure almost made them speechless. Mo Qingge took a deep breath and said, "This isn't an ordinary place." Jiang Shanghong nodded with a pale face. The two of them retreated almost to the door before the spiritual aura pressure lessened. After a moment of silence, Mo Qingge suddenly said, "Senior Martial Brother Jiang, in your opinion, what kind of place is this?" Jiang Shanghong turned to look at her, puzzled. "Junior Martial Brother Yi, what do you mean?" Mo Qingge turned sideways and pointed at the shallow carvings on the back of the stone door. "Look what's carved here?" Filled with doubts, Jiang Shanghong walked closer to take a closer look. This is just a very ordinary mural. If it's a relic from tens of thousands of years ago, it wouldn't be strange to have these things. "Yes, but take a look. What's carved on it?" Jiang Shanghong turned to take a look. After a while he was shocked. "This is a sacrificial scene from millions of years ago," Mo Qingge said faintly. "This might be a sacrificial temple from ancient times." According to legend, sacrificial temples in ancient times were built to look like palaces. Although this underground palace was crude, it was indeed a magnificent palace upon closer inspection. The wide stone path might be the passage leading to the real temple. These stone walls were engraved with murals, but there were very few words on them. Because writing had just been invented in that era, people were used to recording events with murals. On this mural there was a tall altar with several priests standing on it. They were all wearing white robes and below them were kneeling men and women. They were all wrapped in plain animal skins. Only ancient humans would wear animal skins. Millions of years. Jiang Shanghong's complexion was slightly pale. In the end he asked, "Could a relic from millions of years ago exist until now? Why would it be in the sea?" Mo Qingge smiled and said, "Senior Martial Brother Jiang, there's an old saying, white clouds turn into gray dogs, the blue sea turns into mulberry fields. After millions of years, the blue sea of the past has already turned into mulberry fields. The former sacrificial temple might have also been buried in the sea. Maybe it's because it sank into the sea that no one visited it for millions of years, allowing it to be preserved until now." As they stroked the rough stone wall and silently felt this distant time, the two of them were speechless for a while. Millions of years. Then there's no treasure left in this underground palace. Jiang Shanghong murmured. Disappointment flashed across his eyes. After millions of years, any magic weapon would lose its effect. Don't think magic weapons and medicinal pills could really be preserved forever? That was simply impossible. Correct. Mo Qingge wasn't disappointed. She originally didn't go for the treasure. After thinking for a while, she frowned and said, "No, there's a treasure here." Jiang Shanghong raised his head, puzzled. "What?" Mo Qingge looked at him with a smile. "Ren Yufeng went through untold hardships to come here and even schemed to harm me. How could there be no benefits? If this was the sacrificial temple from millions of years ago, it indeed wouldn't have any magic weapons or spiritual pills, but it has Divine Dragon's breath. Divine Dragon's breath that's even stronger than the Divine Dragon Monument." Upon hearing what she said, Jiang Shanghong's complexion gradually turned pale. Divine Dragon's breath. Does he want to die? How could insignificant foundation-building cultivators like them covet such a formidable power? Not to mention them, even nascent soul cultivators wouldn't dare to covet this kind of mysterious power that came from ancient times. After all, absorbing power that one couldn't control would result in one's body exploding and one's death. Maybe he has some kind of secret technique. Mo Qingge frowned and pondered. It's impossible for Ren Yufeng not to know what we already know. He plotted all these things and showed this attitude, which means his ambition isn't small. Aside from Divine Dragon's breath, what else can satisfy his requirements? Jiang Shanghong didn't say anything else. This matter had already surpassed his imagination. He never thought Ren Yufeng would have this kind of idea, and he also didn't know what to do next. He naturally came to this underground palace to look for treasures, but not only were there no treasures in front of him, but there might even be a calamity. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, Jiang Shanghong said after a long silence, since there aren't any treasures, should we go back? Mo Qingge also became hesitant when she heard this. She wanted to kill Ren Yufeng, but she didn't want to lose her life. Who knew what method Ren Yufeng would use? If he succeeded and possessed Divine Dragon's breath, his cultivation level would definitely increase greatly. At that time, whether she could defeat him or not would be a problem. If he didn't succeed and his body exploded, would his method have any other effects? What if he implicated her? The two of them looked at each other and pondered for a long time, but neither of them could come to a decision. Chapter 183. While the two of them were still thinking about their escape route, they heard a loud rumble coming from inside. Then there was a strong spiritual aura fluctuation. Mo Qingge and Jiang Shanghong glanced at each other. Such a violent spiritual aura fluctuation. What happened? In the next moment, the aura filling the Divine Dragon Palace suddenly became turbulent and surged towards the back as if it had a mind of its own. At first, this phenomenon was slow. They only felt the Divine Dragon's breath slowly flowing towards the Divine Dragon statue, but later, it became faster and faster as if something was sucking it away. The two of them became more and more surprised. They were sure something had happened, but they didn't know what to do. At the end of this stone passage was the main hall worshipping the Divine Dragon. There was no other way. Something must have happened behind the Divine Dragon Palace. However, the pressure from the Divine Dragon's breath was too great in this underground palace. They couldn't spread their divine sense at all, so they could only go to the end of the hall to see what was going on. But with such a strange phenomenon in front of them, they didn't know whether they would be in danger if they went there themselves. They didn't have time to think too much. Suddenly, they heard a heavy noise coming from the depths of the hall, as if a stone door had been knocked open. Then they heard chaotic footsteps mixed with urgent shouts. Quick! Let's go! This voice. The two of them turned around and bumped into several people who were running out in a hurry. Junior Marshal Brother Tang. Senior Marshal Brother Jiang. Jiang Shanghong and Tang Fong looked at each other in a daze. Soon after, Tang Fong ran over, pulled Jiang Shanghong's hand and ran outside. Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, let's go. Mo Qingge swept her gaze over them. There were only 4 Zhengfa sect cultivators running out from behind the Divine Dragon Palace. Tang Fong, Yu Xiaoran, Qiu Jiming and Xiahou Yuan. The 4 of them looked flustered and pale, and Yu Xiaoran was even injured. The other 4 people were nowhere to be seen. As soon as they came out, Tang Fong pulled Jiang Shanghong and ran with all his might. Mo Qingge could only run with him. Zhengfa sect cultivators were very fast when using the water escaping technique. Even with the cloud-treading boots, Mo Qingge still found it difficult to keep up. Junior Marshal Brother Tang, what's wrong? Where are Senior Marshal Brother Ren and the others? Why are we running? What happened? Jiang Shanghong asked as he ran. Tang Fong gasped for breath. Senior Brother Ren. Senior Brother Ren, he. Before Tang Fong finished speaking, Qiu Jiming shouted angrily, you're still calling him Senior Apprentice Brother Ren. He's clearly plotting against us from the beginning to the end. Jiang Shanghong was startled. What? Senior Brother Ren also? Qiu Jiming supported the injured Yu Xiaoran and pointed at the wound on Yu Xiaoran's chest. This was done by Senior Brother Ren. There are no treasures here at all. He used us to enter this underground palace, inherited the Divine Dragon's breath and then killed us. What? Jiang Shanghong was astonished. Although he had already guessed this, he thought the possibility was 0. She never expected Ren Yufeng to really think this way. Does he want to die? Even our nascent soul grandmasters don't dare to offend that Divine Dragon breath, but he. The one who interrupted was Xiahou Yuan. She was also very angry. Actually, he obtained a secret technique from here last time. He can use the aura of an ancient divine beast to modify his body so that he has the inheritance of a divine beast. After obtaining this secret technique, he prepared himself well and used us to enter this underground palace. Now that he's done, he still wants to kill us. Mo Tiange wasn't surprised to hear what Xiahou Yuan said. Just now, she and Jiang Shanghong discussed this matter. Ren Yufeng must have had some kind of secret technique, which was why he wanted to obtain the divine dragon's breath. What Xiahou Yuan said just verified this theory. Then what about Senior Marshal Brother Lu and the others? Tang Feng looked sad. Senior Marshal Brother Lu and Senior Marshal Brother Xiang used up all their spiritual aura and were injured by the water carp beast when they were in charge of the formation. They couldn't run away, so they were killed by Senior Marshal Brother Ren right away. Senior Marshal Sister Ai was also. Senior Marshal Sister Ai was always close to Senior Marshal Brother Ren, but I never thought he'd also kill Senior Marshal Sister Ai. What about now? Upon hearing what they said, Jiang Shanghong nervously turned to look behind him. Ren Yufeng didn't chase after them. Senior Marshal Brother Ren's already in the late stage of the foundation building realm, and he still has more than 100 years left in his lifespan. He obviously has a chance to advance to the core formation realm, so why did he do this kind of thing? Who knows? Qiu Jiming said coldly, I found it strange from the beginning. Why didn't he look for late-stage foundation building cultivators he had a good relationship with and instead looked for us? I originally thought he just wanted to take advantage of us, but I never expected he actually had this idea. The difference between the late stage of the foundation building realm and the early stage of the foundation building realm was quite big. During the demonic beast riot that year, there was friction between disciples of Xianqing School and Gujian sect at Qianmen Ridge in Mount Tianhua. Because of Kuang Zhu, a late-stage foundation building cultivator, those Gujian sect disciples didn't dare to act rashly. Later, it was because Wan Honggan, who harbored malicious intentions, instigated them to prepare a sword formation that they finally fought. However, once Kuang Zhu made his move, he dealt with the heavy matter as if it were light, so the victory was in their favor. Ren Yufeng was in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Aside from him, Lu and Xiang and Mo Tiange, and the remaining 6 were in the early stage of the foundation building realm. If 3 middle-stage foundation building cultivators joined hands, they could still win against a late-stage foundation building cultivator, but 6 early-stage foundation building cultivators couldn't defeat a single late-stage foundation building cultivator. Judging from this, Ren Yufeng had planned everything from the beginning. Among the 3 middle-stage foundation building cultivators, he let Lu Rongxing and Xiang Jiang preside over the formation and crippled 2 of them. He also schemed against Mo Tiange when they opened the restrictions on the Divine Dragon Monument, so none of the 3 middle-stage foundation building cultivators could oppose him. The remaining 6 early-stage foundation building cultivators couldn't defeat him, so once they entered the underground palace under the Divine Dragon Monument, Ren Yufeng would have the final say. Mo Tiange sneered in her heart. She didn't sympathize with this group of Zhengfa sect cultivators because when Ren Yufeng schemed against her, they all looked on with folded arms. However, now that they had a falling out with Ren Yufeng, she could join hands with them. Senior Marshal Brother Jiang. She secretly sent Jiang Shanghong a voice transmission. Ask them what's the situation now and how's Ren Yufeng. Jiang Shanghong nodded imperceptibly, then continued to ask, how's Senior Marshal Brother Ren now? Did he really obtain the Divine Dragon's breath? Can we escape? I don't know. The one who answered was still Qiu Jiming. We followed him all the way into this underground palace and into the Divine Dragon Palace. When we arrived at the Dragon Bone altar in the back, we saw a dragon skeleton. At this time, Ren Yufeng suddenly burst into laughter. He said he finally saw the dragon skeleton and that he wanted to obtain the Divine Dragon's breath to become the Divine Dragon's son. Then he used some kind of secret technique and the Divine Dragon's breath on the dragon skeleton really rushed towards him. Senior Marshal Brother Lu was shocked and asked him what was going on. Ren Yufeng proudly said that last time he entered this underground palace alone, he obtained a stone tablet outside the Divine Dragon Palace and discovered the mural that was carved with the inheritance of the Divine Dragon's breath, so he was tempted. In these past few months, he completely comprehended the mural, so he asked us to help him enter this Divine Dragon Palace again so he could carry out the Divine Dragon's secret technique. Mo Tiange and Jiang Shanghong glanced at each other. In fact, they'd already guessed some things, but they still didn't expect Ren Yufeng to be this ruthless. Bringing them in was basically to silence all of them. However, in other words, the Divine Dragon's breath was really the Divine Dragon's breath? There were even dragon bones here. Could it be that dragons really existed? The breath left behind by the legendary king of spiritual beasts, the race closest to the gods, was already so powerful. How powerful would a real dragon be? What was going on with this sacrificial temple? Could it be that it was the burial place of ancient dragons? Qiu Jiming continued. Senior Marshal Brother Lu asked him if he was just using us. Ren Yufeng was furious and said he'd already inherited the divine dragon's breath, so he was no longer a human and was about to become a divine beast. But Senior Marshal Brother Lu actually dared to talk to him like that. Then, he killed Senior Marshal Brother Lu. At this point, anger appeared in Qiu Jiming's eyes. We were all shocked when he killed Senior Marshal Brother Lu. Junior Marshal Sister Ai asked him one more thing, and Senior Marshal Brother Xiang also asked him why he hurt his fellow disciples, so he killed both Junior Marshal Sister Ai and Senior Marshal Brother Xiang. Upon hearing this, Mo Tiange and Jiang Shanghong exchanged glances. It seemed this Ren Yufeng was completely deranged. He actually did this to his own sect. Although the cultivation world was a realistic place, they were, after all, part of the righteous path, a Dao sect, so there were still sect rules that forbade people from attacking each other. This Ren Yufeng actually ignored the sect rules. Could it be that after obtaining the divine dragon's breath, he no longer needed to stay in Jingfa sect? Or perhaps he was certain they couldn't escape. When she thought of the latter possibility, Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. If it was the original Ren Yufeng, she still had a certain degree of confidence. With so many treasures, it wouldn't be a problem for her to fight against a late-stage foundation-building cultivator. But how strong would Ren Yufeng, who was said to have obtained the divine dragon's breath, be? She had no idea. Jiang Shanghong asked the question she wanted to know. Is Senior Marshal Brother Ren very strong now? Qiu Jiming was silent. The one who answered was Tang Fong. Senior Marshal Brother Ren is very scary now. After he killed Senior Marshal Brother Lu, Senior Marshal Brother Xiang, and Senior Marshal Sister Ai, we realized something was wrong. He was indeed stronger than before, so we hastily fled. Senior Marshal Brother Ren seemed to want to chase us, but he stopped before he could absorb the divine dragon's breath. Therefore we also don't know how strong he is now. However, the divine dragon's breath is so powerful, it definitely can't be weak. What Tang Fong said made Mo Tiange feel very uneasy. Ren Yufeng really had a way to absorb the divine dragon's breath, but they all knew how powerful the divine dragon's breath was. If he really withstood the backlash of this powerful force, how strong would he become? Even if it was impossible for him to advance to the nascent soul realm in one go, it was very possible for him, who was originally in the late stage of the foundation building realm, to enter the core formation realm in one go after he obtained the divine dragon's breath. Mo Tiange believed she could contend with a 5th-ranked demonic beast, and she could even escape if she had the virtual sky world, but she absolutely couldn't resist a core formation cultivator. This was because humans had intelligence that demonic beasts did not have. Under a relatively equal level of intelligence, strength was enough to determine the outcome. No matter how many treasures she had, it was useless. In the face of strength that was strong enough, tricks were also useless. Her thoughts turned at lightning speed and she already had the idea of escaping. The simplest method was to enter the virtual sky world, but if she did that, how could she avoid the eyes and ears of the people in front of her? Besides, she didn't care about the others, but she at least wanted to protect Jiang Shanghong. Chapter 184. The 6 of them ran like crazy, but this underground palace was too big. They'd been here for half a day, so how could they escape in a short time? At the same time, all the divine dragon's breath in the underground palace rushed towards the divine dragon palace. Mo Tiange cast a glance behind her. The pitch-black passage was peaceful. Only the faint light from the moonstones they carried was visible. However, this tranquility contained a spiritual aura pressure that made her tremble with fear. The divine dragon's breath was gradually fading, and the pressure it brought was also fading, but the 6 people present were even more afraid. Because the fading divine dragon's breath was all on one person, and they didn't know what would happen to that person after obtaining the dragon's breath. As they ran, they suddenly heard a deafening roar. The water surged and the underground palace shook. The expressions of the 6 people changed dramatically. The roar was deep and unclear, but they could hear the majesty in it. The might of the divine dragon. Could it be that Ren Yufeng really succeeded? Senior Marshal Brothers. Tang Fong called out with an ugly expression. What should we do? Qiu Jiming looked bitter. Run. We can only run for our lives. I hope that Ren Yufeng hasn't finished yet so we can run back to the sect to report. Then he looked at Yu Xiaoran, who he was half dragging, with a pained expression. Junior Marshal Brother Yu's injuries are very serious. I'll take him with me. The rest of you should use your abilities to run for your lives as quickly as possible. Senior Marshal Brother Chiu. Tang Feng's expression changed. You mean, one of us has to run back to the sect to report, otherwise we'll all die here. Senior Marshal Brother Chiu is right. Xiahou Yuan's gaze was stern. Junior Marshal Brother Tang. Don't be so wishy-washy. Right now, saving our lives is more important. Tang Feng's gaze darkened. He clenched his teeth and nodded. All right, we'll run for our lives separately. Whoever can escape will go back to the sect to report, but if we can't, then we'll consider ourselves unlucky, Jiang Shanghang said with a ruthless expression. Jiang Shanghang said with a ruthless expression on his face, once we leave this underground palace, we'll split up and run for our lives. That way, our chances of escaping will be a bit higher than running together. Apart from this, there was no other way. Mo Chenga was silent as she listened to their conversation. They were all disciples of Zhengfa sect, so there was still affection between them. For example, Qiu Jiming was willing to take Yu Xiaoran with him to escape, even though that would greatly reduce his speed. However, she wasn't a disciple of Zhengfa sect, so she only met these people by chance, so she could only take care of herself. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. When Jiang Shanghang saw her, he hesitated for a moment and said, You? Mo Chenga knew she couldn't match Zhengfa sect cultivators' water-escaping technique underwater. The reason she was able to keep up with them now was partly because the power of her cloud-treading boots was extraordinary and partly because Yu Xiaoran was injured, which slowed down their speed. Don't worry, Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, Mo Chenga said faintly, although my fleeing technique isn't good, I still have some life-saving methods. She originally planned to find an opportunity to knock Jiang Shanghang unconscious and bring him into the virtual sky world, which could also be considered as repaying him for staying behind to protect her life. But now they already had other countermeasures, so it wasn't worthwhile for her to do that. After all, her trust in Jiang Shanghang hadn't reached the point where she would do everything she could to ensure his survival. Jiang Shanghang's gaze wavered for a moment, but in the end he still clenched his teeth and said, Then, let's leave it to fate. If we're fated, we'll meet again in the future. Mo Chenga nodded, but she couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In all these years there weren't many people she could trust. Before she was 20, there was only her second uncle, and after she was 20, there were only a few people in Shenqing school. Other people she met by chance might temporarily team up with, but in the end they didn't trust each other wholeheartedly. She originally felt the same towards Jiang Shanghang. She was even angry that he concealed his real purpose for coming here. But when he was willing to give up the chance to search for treasures and stay to look after her, she felt maybe she could trust him a bit more. However, she didn't have a chance to verify it now. Let's just leave it to fate. We're all floating duckweeds under the mandate of heaven. We'll meet by chance and part with fate. As long as we're alive, we might have a chance to meet again. When they escaped from Mount Yunwu back then, they never thought they'd meet again. Alright, let's not talk nonsense. Let's split up. Qiu Jiming shouted and took the lead to rush out of the underground palace. The others also didn't hesitate. One by one they followed the water and escaped. Once they were out of the underground palace, they left the transporting formation on the Divine Dragon Monument. Each of them activated their water-escaping technique and escaped as fast as they could. Mo Chenga saw 4 flight lights flashing in different directions and disappearing in the blink of an eye. She sighed but didn't follow them. Instead, she turned around and returned to the Divine Dragon Monument's restriction through the transporting formation. These 4 people had a natural advantage in the water, so she was destined to be left behind. If Ren Yufeng took a long time, everyone might be able to escape, but if he eventually caught up to them, the first person he would catch up to would be her. She pressed the space between her eyebrows and silently recited an incantation. The light between her eyebrows grew brighter and brighter, and after several breaths, her figure disappeared from this land of hiding dragon. She touched the space between her eyebrows, causing the bead to float out. With a stroke of her fingertip, a crack appeared in the virtual sky world, allowing her to see the situation outside. With the virtual sky world, whatever the higher-ups thought was impossible. She could hide properly inside the virtual sky world. No matter what kind of existence Ren Yufeng became, he wouldn't be able to find her. Moreover, she also wanted to see how strong Ren Yufeng would become after absorbing the so-called divine beast from the distant past era, the divine dragon's breath. The entrance to the underground palace was still open, but the divine dragon's breath coming from inside was getting weaker and weaker. In the end, even the breath from the divine dragon monument also started to flow into the underground palace. It didn't take long for the divine dragon's breath near the monument to completely disappear. Chenga stared at the entrance to the underground palace. She was now inside the virtual sky world. Although she could see the situation outside, she couldn't use her divine sense, so she didn't know whether Ren Yufeng had already chased after her or not. However, since the absorption of the divine dragon's breath had stopped, he should come out very soon. Sure enough, before long Ren Yufeng's figure rushed out of the underground palace's entrance. The moment she saw him, Chenga wrinkled her brows. She wasn't outside, so she couldn't sense Ren Yufeng's momentum at the moment. However, Ren Yufeng's appearance was completely different from before. Ren Yufeng's original appearance was that of a youth in his 20s. Although his expression made people feel uncomfortable, his face was still fair and clean. However, the Ren Yufeng in front of her now had a pitch-black face, a ferocious expression, and his whole body was emitting a black aura as if he was possessed by the devil. Upon seeing his appearance, Chenga's heart thumped. Dragons were immemorial divine beasts. It was rumored that their aura was vast and righteous, and they were the race closest to gods. Whether it was the divine dragon monument or the divine dragon statue in the underground palace, the divine dragon's breath was vast and sacred. However, Ren Yufeng looked like he was possessed by the devil. There wasn't a trace of the holiness of a divine dragon's breath on him. Chenga was sure he didn't absorb the divine dragon's breath and became the so-called son of the divine dragon. What was going on? Ren Yufeng also stepped onto the transporting formation and arrived outside the divine dragon monument's restriction. Chenga pondered for a moment, then pressed the space between her eyebrows. She exited the virtual sky world and once again entered the underground palace. This world had existed for an unknown number of millions of years since the beginning of time. Looking at it now, these millions of years had been divided into several stages. Immemorial era, divine destruction, primordial era, present era. The creation of the primordial world, the transformation of heaven and earth, and the emergence of gods and spirits. This was the distant past era. The distant past era lasted for millions of years. In the beginning it was a world of gods, monsters and demons. Later, humans appeared and the gods left the human world, but spiritual beings remained. The period when monsters and humans lived together was also called the distant past era. The distant past era was a relatively special period of several 100,000 years. Humans were born there, and they slowly became the spirit of all living things. Finally, cultivators appeared. After millions of years, they gained wisdom and learned cultivation methods from monsters and spirits. Those who were close to spirits were immortals, and those who were close to demons were devils. The power of immortals and devils gradually grew stronger, and finally, a great war broke out. The gods who established the world's rules intervened, causing immortals and devils who were powerful enough to move mountains and drain seas to ascend, while monsters and spirits moved to another world. Only cultivators and devil cultivators who weren't powerful enough were left in the human world. The distant past era ended there. Divine beasts were the kings of this period. Divine beasts were the most powerful spirits. They were born with spiritual power, unlike cultivators and devil cultivators who had to cultivate to obtain magic power. Their strength was close to that of gods, stronger than both immortals and devils. They were also the source of human cultivators' cultivation techniques. Judging from the sacrificial scene in this divine dragon sacrificial temple, it should have been a time when humans hadn't appeared for a long time and hadn't cultivated immortals and devils yet. The distant past era lasted for millions of years, and the distant past era was a period of several 100,000 years, which was also the period when humans originated. During this period, gods left the human world, and divine beasts were the most powerful forces humans could come into contact with. They possessed the bloodline of gods, so they were sacred and vast. They were the most powerful kind of power among spirits. In the distant past era, divine beasts were the gods in the hearts of humans. The divine dragon's breath in the divine dragon monument and the underground palace indeed possessed the majesty and sacredness that a divine beast should have. If one really absorbed this kind of divine dragon's breath, their spiritual aura would certainly be upright and pure, and it would absolutely be impossible for it to turn black as if they were possessed. Immortals came from spirits while devils came from monsters. There was absolutely no reason for one to become a devil by absorbing the breath of spirits. Chenga was almost certain that Ren Yufeng's so-called method of absorbing the divine dragon's breath was definitely wrong. But why was it wrong? The secret technique that came from this divine dragon sacrificial temple definitely didn't make one a devil. Otherwise, how could this dense divine dragon's breath be explained? Spirits restrained monsters, and they also had an innate restraining power over devil cultivators. Wherever the divine dragon's breath existed, a devil-like breath shouldn't appear. Unless the breath on Ren Yufeng's body wasn't devil aura, or this wasn't the divine dragon's breath at all. Mo Chenga once again stepped into the divine dragon hall. Without the divine dragon's breath, this divine dragon statue also didn't have its previous spiritual aura pressure. She bypassed the divine dragon statue and stepped through the stone door that Tang Feng and the others escaped from. Although she was already mentally prepared, Mo Chenga was still shocked. This was a huge skeleton. Even though it had lost its life for millions of years, it still emitted a terrifying spiritual aura pressure. This was the divine dragon's bone. The consequence of not sleeping after a long journey was being confused for the whole night. I'll continue at night, so I'll go rest first and crawl slowly. Chapter 185. The huge skeleton laid quietly on the vast square, looking like a real dragon overlooking the human world. Its posture was natural, tall, and holy as if it was alive. The white skeleton didn't change color because of millions of years. Instead, it became even more sparkling and translucent. It was as if she had seen millions of years ago, when a true divine beast was lying on the square, quietly looking down at the humans below. It had a leisurely posture and was being worshipped by humans. Every move it made was filled with the sacred majesty of a divine beast. Even now, its momentum was still overbearing. Mo Chenga slowly approached it, looking up at the ancient divine dragon skeleton. Its momentum was still there, and its spiritual aura was also present. It was holy and vast, just like the divine dragon's breath outside, but even stronger, making it hard for her to breathe. But why did Ren Yufeng become like that? This kind of divine dragon's breath shouldn't cause people to be possessed by the devil. But aside from being possessed by the devil, how else could Ren Yufeng's appearance be explained? Could it be he used the wrong method? Before she could figure out the reason, Mo Chenga keenly sensed a kind of murderous aura approaching. Under the pressure of the divine dragon's breath, she couldn't spread her divine sense. But this murderous aura didn't need to be sensed by divine sense to be transmitted to her very clearly. As soon as she sensed it, she immediately pressed the space between her eyebrows, launched the virtual sky world, and hid inside. This murderous aura must belong to Ren Yufeng without a doubt. Sure enough, before long, a person flew in from the entrance. It was Ren Yufeng, and he was holding two people in his hands. One was Qiu Jiming and the other was Xiahou Yuan. Upon seeing this, Mo Chenga's heart relaxed. Without Jiang Shanghong he might really have escaped. Outside the virtual sky world, Ren Yufeng grabbed the two people, threw them to the ground and snorted coldly. "Wanna run?" He fell heavily. Qiu Jiming and Xiahou Yuan were suddenly thrown to the ground, and both of them screamed miserably. Judging from his momentum, Mo Chenga guessed that Ren Yufeng's cultivation level was at least in the core formation realm. Mo Chenga frowned as she watched the scene outside. Senior Marshal Brother Ren. Xiahou Yuan crawled up. Once she saw Ren Yufeng's murderous expression, she immediately begged, "Senior Marshal Brother Ren, in any case we're from the same sect. My master and Marshal Uncle Buki also have a good relationship. Please consider our past friendship and let me go." Ren Yufeng's face, which was covered in black aura, glared at her, but a contemptuous smile appeared on his face. "Let you go? Xiahou Yuan, have you forgotten how you used to laugh at me? Relying on the fact that your Xiahou clan has some status in Zhengfa sect, you secretly mocked me in front of Ai Xian for being so old and having no hope of making a realm breakthrough. Don't you remember?" "I remember it very clearly." "You?" Xiahou Yuan was taken aback, then panicked. "You heard me?" In any case, Ren Yufeng was a late-stage foundation-building cultivator, and on the surface his status was still higher than hers, so Xiahou Yuan definitely wouldn't say this kind of thing to his face. Right now, Xiahou Yuan was completely dumbfounded. She never expected that the person in question would actually overhear her private conversation with her sister, and even wanted to settle the score with her. Ren Yufeng grinned nastily. His originally fair face was now shrouded in black aura, making his smile look even more terrifying. "Before, you were a member of Xiahou clan, so I couldn't do anything to you. I could only swallow my anger, but now..." He opened his hand and a mass of black aura appeared in the hollow of his palm. Under Xiahou Yuan's horrified gaze, the black aura was lightly flung out. It was as light as a feather and didn't seem to exert any force at all. However, once Xiahou Yuan came into contact with the black aura, she suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Her scream was so miserable that even the current Mo Chenga couldn't help but tremble. Xiahou Yuan was completely surrounded by the black aura. Her continuous blood-curdling screams came from inside the black aura, and the pain and misery they conveyed was unbearable to listen to. At the same time, Xiahou Yuan seemed to be unable to bear the pain and started to roll on the ground. This place was originally underwater, and because she ate bubble fruit, she had a layer of waterproof barrier around her. Now that she was surrounded by the black aura, that barrier also slowly disappeared. Mo Chenga saw that Xiahou Yuan had lost the barrier and was now completely submerged in seawater. Her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose were all soaked by seawater, and the little bit of skin that was exposed was once again covered by the black aura. She looked like she was in unbearable pain. Mo Chenga wrinkled her brows slightly. Cultivators had a much stronger tolerance for pain compared to mortals, so they definitely wouldn't show such a painful expression. What kind of cruel thing was this in the end? What was so mysterious about this black aura? Why was it able to make a cultivator suffer so much? Qiu Jiming was already stupefied to see such a painful expression on Xiahou Yuan's face, but Ren Yufeng actually looked pleased as if he was enjoying the aftertaste. Xiahou Yuan went from gritting her teeth to enduring the pain to screaming at the top of her lungs. In the end, when the waterproof barrier disappeared, she actually couldn't even scream. Her ears and nose were blocked by seawater, and her face suddenly turned purple. She unconsciously grabbed her own neck, struggling in pain. After a long time, Ren Yufeng probably thought he'd enjoyed enough, so he softly withdrew the black aura. He then smiled and looked at her pitifully. "Tell me, why did you have to do this? If you didn't say anything back then, you wouldn't be like this today." Without the black aura covering her, Xiahou Yuan's whole body was exposed. She no longer had the waterproof barrier, so she was completely submerged in the water. Although she wouldn't drown, her injuries would only worsen. Presumably, this Xiahou Yuan was a young miss of a clan, so she'd never suffered before. After being tormented like this, she was already half dead. Mo Chenga watched this scene with a frown. Ren Yufeng was actually so cruel and morbidly pursuing the pleasure of torturing others, she was almost certain these two people wouldn't survive. Although she was hiding inside the virtual sky world and wouldn't be discovered by Ren Yufeng, what if he absorbed this so-called divine dragon's breath and obtained an ability she didn't understand? Based on Ren Yufeng's current behavior, he definitely wouldn't let her have an easy time. But what was going on with Ren Yufeng? His cultivation level was in the late stage of the foundation building realm, and he was also the disciple of a core formation cultivator. Even Jiang Shanghong was very satisfied with Zhengfa Sek's treatment, so why was he so resentful? After tormenting Xiahou Yuan, Ren Yufeng turned to Qiu Jiming. His expressionless gaze shifted back and forth on Qiu Jiming's body. Qiu Jiming's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. Based on what she saw just now, this Qiu Jiming had a violent temper, but he was also somewhat upright. He was willing to run with the injured Yu Shaoran even though it would slow him down, and he hated Ren Yufeng's behavior very much. But Mo Chenga really couldn't guess what he would do in the end. Ren Yufeng suddenly walked towards Qiu Jiming step by step. His steps were very slow, but they were very intimidating. In fact, because of his slowness, he was even more frightening. He seemed to enjoy this kind of frightening feeling very much, so he deliberately walked step by step very steadily. Qiu Jiming became more and more frightened. His face became paler and paler, his lips trembled, and beads of sweat the size of beans dripped down from his forehead. Mo Chenga noticed that his breathing was already irregular, and his nostrils were opening and closing rapidly and powerlessly. Just as Ren Yufeng was about to reach him, Qiu Jiming's knees suddenly went soft and he knelt down. His face wrinkled and tears and snot flowed down his face. He tremblingly said, "Senior Martial Brother Ren, Senior Martial Brother Ren, I've never wronged you, please forgive me." Ren Yufeng stood motionless, looking down at him condescendingly. He didn't say anything and just watched coldly. He watched the arrogant and violent Qiu Jiming cry in front of him until his entire face was a mess and he couldn't even breathe. It was very easy to be arrogant. When there was no threat to one's life, one could naturally assume an arrogant posture and put themselves in a pure and clean position. However, when it came to one's life, it was also very easy to let go of this arrogance. There was practically no need for any preparation. One would naturally lower their arrogant head and straighten their knees. Mo Chenga sighed softly. She knew this actually wasn't Qiu Jiming's fault. The fact that he was willing to run away with the injured Yu Shaoran already proved that he wasn't a bad person. However, when it came to one's life, who would be able to harden their bones without any hesitation? Mo Chenga believed she also had to assess the situation before she could make a choice. For cultivators, life was too important. What was the purpose of cultivating? Of course it was to live a long life. Since it was to live a long life, life was the most important thing. Friendship, interests, and even dignity couldn't compete with it for this most important position. Ren Yufeng seemed to be very satisfied. He opened his mouth slightly, revealing a smile that seemed both mocking and pleased. Then his gaze turned cold. Qiu Jiming, you're good at everything, but you think too highly of yourself. You really haven't offended me, so I won't torture you. Upon hearing what he said, Qiu Jiming immediately relaxed and said repeatedly, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Ren. Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Ren." Don't be happy too early. Ren Yufeng once again looked at him with a chilly gaze. I just wanted to say that I can let you die a little more painlessly. Qiu Jiming's expression froze. Upon seeing Qiu Jiming's current expression, Ren Yufeng finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. Rest assured, you and I are both mortals with no background, so I won't torture you. I'll make it so you won't feel the pain of death. Qiu Jiming's gaze finally moved. His eyes widened, his lips tightened, and his brows furrowed. Seemingly realizing he couldn't escape in the end, he became furious. He stood up and pointed at Ren Yufeng. Senior Marshal Brother Ren Yu, what about me? Ren Yufeng stopped laughing and stared at him contemptuously. I've already knelt, yet you still want to lecture me? Qiu Jiming's face turned purple. He paused for a moment, then shouted angrily, Senior Marshal Brother Ren, you're obviously already in the late stage of the foundation building realm and have hopes of advancing to the core formation realm. Why are you doing this? Among us, you're the one with the highest status. Could it be because of a few gossips from Junior Marshal Sister Xiaoho? Gossips? A mocking expression appeared on Ren Yufeng's face, but in the end, his expression suddenly turned ferocious. I've had enough of gossips. What did you think I sacrificed and what did I get in return? Ever since I entered Zhengfa sect, I've been cultivating diligently and making friends with others. My aptitude isn't high, but I dare say I'm more diligent than all the other disciples. His breathing started to quicken as he paced back and forth in front of Qiu Jiming. His expression was full of resentment. I entered Zhengfa sect when I was 10 and cultivated diligently every day and night. In the end, when I was 40, I succeeded in building my foundation. I originally thought that since I built my foundation and a core formation elder was willing to accept me as a disciple, my future would definitely be bright and no one would dare to look down on me anymore. But what happened? But what happened? His voice grew louder and louder. They didn't say anything on the surface, but as I grew older and older, not a single one of them looked down on me. They said my aptitude was ordinary and I definitely wouldn't form my gold core. Although I advanced to the middle stage and the late stage, they still firmly believed in me. In the late stage, my cultivation level finally stagnated, so they became complacent and satisfied. Seeing how I cultivated every day and night to no avail, they were extremely complacent. In the end, even the master I respected the most also gave up on me. Once he finished speaking, Ren Yufeng's voice became softer, but it still carried a hint of hopeless sorrow. I'm not young anymore, I'm already 300 years old. If I don't form my gold core soon, I won't have another chance. Chapter 186. 300 years. Although Mo Chenga had long guessed that Ren Yufeng had taken look-preserving pills or a cultivation technique that had the effect of preserving his youth, she still didn't expect him to actually be 300 years old already. What kind of age was 300 years old to a foundation establishment cultivator? Early-stage foundation establishment cultivators could only live to 300 years old. Middle-stage and late-stage foundation establishment cultivators could live up to 400 years if they took good care of themselves. However, 400 years was only the upper limit. Most of them would die before reaching that age. If what Ren Yufeng said was true, he indeed wasn't young anymore. It could be said that he already had one foot in the grave. For cultivators, the younger they were, the better it was. For example, in the foundation establishment realm, the elite disciples of sects would generally be able to advance in their 30s, and the weaker ones would be able to advance in their 50s. If they still couldn't advance in their 50s, then they would be no different from ordinary disciples. As for ordinary disciples, they usually reached the foundation establishment stage before the age of 100. If they passed the age of 100, their chances of reaching the foundation establishment stage would be greatly reduced. It was the same for core formation. Before the age of 200 was the best period for core formation. After 200 years old, the difficulty of core formation would increase greatly. If Ren Yufeng was already 300 years old and his original aptitude was very ordinary, it was no wonder other people thought he couldn't form his gold core. It wasn't that there weren't cultivators who could reach core formation before 300 years old, but the probability was much lower than that of young cultivators under 200 years old. If they didn't come across a fortuitous encounter, it would be very difficult for them to break through. Once cultivators passed this period, they would be considered old. Reaching old age was the sorrow of cultivators. Ren Yufeng stared at the void in front of him, then said slowly, "Do you think I'm very arrogant because I'm proud? If I am not arrogant and proud, who will respect me? Even this woman, whose cultivation is far below mine, can look down on me." His face revealed a vicious expression as he glared at Xiahou Yuan, who was about to lose her breath. For a moment no one spoke. Xiahou Yuan already couldn't move. Qiu Jiming was already dumbfounded. As for Ren Yufeng, his expression was fierce, but he was also staring at the sky in loneliness. Mo Chenga quietly watched them from inside the virtual sky world. The path of cultivation was cruel. Everything was determined by one's cultivation level. No matter how much of a genius you were at the beginning, if you couldn't break through, you would be laughed at by others. However, she didn't feel the slightest bit of affection for Ren Yufeng. How could he be the only cultivator who had entered old age? Those aura-refining cultivators who were trapped in the aura-refining realm their entire lives, unable to advance even the slightest bit, and in the end, exhausted their lifespans in a little more than 100 years, were thousands of times more pitiful than him. But so what? So many people in the cultivation world had come through this way. In fact, Ren Yufeng's cultivation level was already in the late stage of the foundation building realm, and he was also accepted by a core formation cultivator as his disciple. Aside from these elite disciples who had backers, which ordinary disciple would look down on him? Just like Jiang Shanghong, he didn't dare to be disrespectful in the slightest in front of this senior martial brother Ren. There were so many people traveling with them, so Xiahou Yuan definitely wasn't the only elite disciple. So what if you gossip behind my back? If a cultivator didn't even have this bit of breadth of mind, how could he form his gold core? Ren Yufeng most likely hadn't made any progress for many years, so his mental state had long entered a demonic barrier. Even if he reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm, he still wouldn't succeed in forming his gold core. Senior brother Ren? Qiu Jiming finally caught his breath and said, "Are you really not willing to let me go?" Ren Yufeng's cold gaze swept over him. "What else do you want to say?" Qiu Jiming, who had lost all hope, lowered his head, looking dispirited. But after a while he seemed to feel a glimmer of hope again, so he stood up and said hurriedly, "Junior Martial Brother Tang and Junior Martial Brother Jiang already escaped. They'll definitely report this to the school. At that time, a nascent soul grandmaster will definitely come out to clean up the school. Senior Martial Brother Ren, even if you kill me, you won't be able to block the news." Upon hearing what he said, Mo Chenga, who was inside the virtual sky world, heaved a sigh of relief. At least Jiang Shanghong and Tang Fang escaped. "Who said I wanted to block the news?" Ren Yufeng cast him a contemptuous glance. "In a moment I'll close the entrance to the underground palace. Once I've completely absorbed the divine dragon's breath, what can a nascent soul grandmaster do?" Qiu Jiming was silent. He never expected Ren Yufeng to be so confident in his own strength. Ren Yufeng stretched out his hand, playing with a mass of black aura in his hand. He looked Qiu Jiming up and down as if he was considering where to attack. Upon seeing Ren Yufeng's behavior, Qiu Jiming's complexion became paler and paler, and he started to tremble violently. Nevertheless, Ren Yufeng didn't throw that mass of black aura out. He paused for a long time before he suddenly heaved a sigh. "Junior Martial Brother Qiu, I really don't want to kill you so soon. If I kill you, nobody will talk to me anymore." What Ren Yufeng said made Qiu Jiming's eyes brighten. "Senior Martial Brother Ren, let me go. Let me go. I promise I'll listen to you, at the very least I can keep you company." Ren Yufeng's expression didn't change. He didn't have any intention of letting him go, but he also didn't kill him right away. In the end, he withdrew the mass of black aura in his hand. "Forget it, I'll keep you alive for a while. However, you shouldn't be happy too early. I'm only letting you go for now. Whenever I want to take your life, you'll still have to die." Although it was only for now, Qiu Jiming heaved a huge sigh of relief. He said gratefully, "Thank you, Senior Martial Brother Ren, for not killing me." "Thank you, Senior Martial Brother Ren." Ren Yufeng waved his hand and said coldly, "Take care of this woman's corpse. I'm going to close the entrance to the underground palace." In the end, he said with a warning, "If you're not obedient, I'll take your life right away." Qiu Jiming naturally promised him again and again. Ren Yufeng then turned around and left. When Ren Yufeng left his line of sight, the smile on Qiu Jiming's face disappeared. He sat down with a lifeless expression. He just sat there expressionlessly for a while, as if he still hadn't adapted to the change in his identity. As he thought about it, he suddenly laid his head on his lap and burst into tears. A tall and strong man curled up into a ball and wailed loudly like this. It was hard to say whether this scene was funny or pitiful. Qiu Jiming was very innocent. In fact, he didn't do anything wrong. It could even be said that he was caught by Ren Yufeng because he ran away with Yu Xiaoran. Now, only Jiang Shanghang and Tang Feng escaped, while the ones who were caught were Qiu Jiming and Xiahou Yuan. Yu Xiaoran was most likely already dead, and he himself also couldn't escape this calamity. How much better was being alive for the time being than being dead? This was an unknown underground palace. The scenery of the land of Hiding Dragon changed every year. Things from one year couldn't be kept for the next year, so who knew where they would be next year? Not to mention next year, who knew when Ren Yufeng would suddenly be in a bad mood and want to kill him? Even if Ren Yufeng didn't kill him, this was underwater. Foundation building cultivators couldn't create a waterproof barrier on their own. Even if he was a cultivator and could survive underwater, there was still a time limit. One bubble fruit could only last for one day, so he only had a few dozen of them with him at most. Soon after he used them, he would still die. The more Qiu Jiming thought about it, the more sorrowful he felt, so he simply cried to his heart's content. Mo Chinga quietly watched this man who had already collapsed. She didn't do anything. She could take advantage of this moment to bring Qiu Jiming into the virtual sky world, but Qiu Jiming was missing and there was only one passage in this underground palace. What would she do if Ren Yufeng became suspicious? She had no idea what kind of ability Ren Yufeng had after obtaining the divine dragon's breath. Besides, this person was so weak. Even if she saved him, his willpower had already collapsed, so he didn't have any future. Qiu Jiming didn't know that during this period of time, he had just brushed past the path of survival. He cried for a while, but as if he sensed something, he hastily stood up and cleaned up Xiahou Yuan's corpse. Xiahou Yuan had been entangled by that mass of black aura for a long time, and the waterproof barrier had long been destroyed, so she was submerged in the water, practically drowning to death bit by bit. After burning Xiahou Yuan's corpse with his Dantian real fire, Ren Yufeng came in. He seemed very satisfied with Qiu Jiming's obedience, so he didn't say anything. He directly walked towards the stone platform next to the square and sat down cross-legged. This stone platform was where the dragon's foot was placed. Ren Yufeng sat on the dragon's palm bone. He seemed to be regulating his breath. Mo Chinga saw the black aura surging on his body, and gradually the divine dragon's breath on the dragon's bones also slowly flowed towards him. Qiu Jiming watched this scene in a daze. He was already intimidated by Ren Yufeng's means and didn't dare to make any movements. But Mo Chinga was different. She carefully observed every detail of Ren Yufeng's cultivation. The divine dragon's breath didn't produce devil aura. Perhaps she could find the answer from the details of Ren Yufeng's cultivation. After watching for a long time, Mo Chinga's eyes suddenly lit up. She discovered something. Ren Yufeng looked like he was absorbing the divine dragon's breath, but the divine dragon's breath only flowed towards him slowly, and the divine dragon's breath on the dragon's bones didn't decrease in the slightest. What did this mean? At the very least, it meant that the breath on Ren Yufeng's body wasn't the divine dragon's breath. But if it wasn't the divine dragon's breath, what could it be? Mo Chinga couldn't figure it out. After thinking for a long time, she could only be sure that the so-called divine dragon secret technique Ren Yufeng used to make him the son of the divine dragon was either fake or completely wrong. If the method he used to absorb the divine dragon's breath was wrong, then what was going on now? Mo Chinga didn't have the slightest clue about these questions, so she could only helplessly give up. Instead of thinking about these questions, she might as well think about what she should do next. She was naturally safe inside the virtual sky world, but that was all. She couldn't stay inside for the rest of her life. Of course, she could use all kinds of spiritual panaceas to slowly cultivate inside the virtual sky world, but without any progress in her mental state, the danger of realm breakthroughs would be too great. Who knew how long it would take for her to grow strong enough to fight against Ren Yufeng? What if Ren Yufeng's evil technique also made realm breakthroughs very quickly? Mo Chinga sat inside the small hut inside the virtual sky world and pondered for a long time. All of a sudden she had a flash of inspiration. Right. How could she forget that Ren Yufeng made a heart demon oath to her that he'd let her leave safely? Nevertheless, this thought only flashed in her mind for a second before Mo Chinga became discouraged again. 4 cultivators of the righteous path, A heart demon oath was a very important oath because inner demons were the biggest obstacle to realm breakthroughs for cultivators, but devil path cultivators didn't have this restriction. If Ren Yufeng had already turned into a devil cultivator, then a heart demon oath wouldn't have any effect on him because devil cultivators didn't need to experience inner demons to make realm breakthroughs. Things were back to square one. How could she leave? In the end, Mo Chenga sighed and muttered to herself, "Forget it. If I can't leave, I'll just treat it as if I'm in closed-door meditation here. Maybe it won't take several decades before Ren Yufeng makes a mistake in his own cultivation." At that time, just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard a loud noise coming from outside, followed by Qiu Jiming's panicked voice. "Senior Marshal Brother Ren, what's wrong?" Mo Chenga looked up and saw that Ren Yufeng had finished his cultivation. He was now sitting on the high platform with a gloomy expression. Qiu Jiming was sitting not far from him with blood on the corner of his mouth. It seemed he was thrown out by Ren Yufeng. Ren Yufeng cast a contemptuous glance at Qiu Jiming. "What? Do you want me to make a mistake in my cultivation?" Sensing the killing intent in his words, Qiu Jiming hastily shook his head. "Of course not, I'm just worried." "Worried about me?" Ren Yufeng sneered. "It'd be strange if you were worried about me. You'll only survive if something happens to me." Qiu Jiming couldn't refute him. He just lowered his head and said nothing. Ren Yufeng humphed coldly. "Don't be delusional. I won't die, and you don't need to expect those old guys to come and save you. This underground palace can't be opened without a special technique. We were only able to come in because the divine dragon's breath inside was attracted by the divine dragon monument, so an entrance was opened. Now, only the dragon's breath is left on the dragon bones, so those old guys can't come in even if they die." Once he finished talking, Ren Yufeng stood up and walked down the high platform. "What a pity. That Xianqing School's Yi Xiaotian ran away. That woman has a lot of treasures. It'd be great if we could get our hands on them." Qiu Jiming looked up and said hesitantly, "That junior marshal sister Yi?" He suddenly stopped halfway as if he didn't know whether he should say it or not. "What?" Ren Yufeng glanced at him. "If you have something to say, just say it." Since Ren Yufeng spoke, Qiu Jiming hastily said, "I didn't see the junior marshal sister Yi go out at all. Our Zhengfa sect cultivators use the water escaping technique in the water, so our speed is much faster than hers. There's no reason she could escape faster than me." Ren Yufeng curled his lips. "You're too naive. That Yi Xiaotian has a lot of treasures. Who knows if she has one or two treasures that could help her escape." He then sighed and said, "That woman not only has a lot of treasures, but her cultivation level is also high. Judging from her age, I reckon she's not even 80 years old. I'm afraid she's even a bit younger." Qiu Jiming didn't understand and stared at Ren Yufeng in confusion. Ren Yufeng frowned impatiently. "So stupid. Do you remember how old Jiang Shuihan is? I think he's only about 50 years old, right? Yi Xiaoyan's cultivation level is obviously higher than his, but he keeps calling her junior marshal sister Yi. Obviously Yi Xiaoyan's younger than him." Jiang Shuihan was Jiang Shanghang's current name. Although this Ren Yufeng has an eccentric temper and a cruel personality, he's not stupid. He actually knows how to calculate her age. Qiu Jiming was taken aback by what Ren Yufeng said. Less than 50 years old? Junior marshal sister Yi is already in the peak of the middle stage of the foundation building realm. She must have come out to gain experience so she can advance to the late stage. She succeeds, wouldn't that mean? Reaching the late stage of the foundation building realm at 50 years old was indeed a bit shocking. Even geniuses, as many people called them, couldn't achieve this. Ren Yufeng snorted. "You're too naive. Don't forget that she came from Xianqing School. Xianqing School's current strength isn't inferior to Tiandao sects. If it produces one or two nascent soul cultivators within 100 years, it'll surpass Tiandao sect and become the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole. It's different from Tiandao sect. Tiandao sect has the most people, so it also has a lot of nascent soul cultivators. Xianqing School is famous for producing genius cultivators. The current late-stage nascent soul cultivator, Lord Taoist Jinyang, and Lord Taoist Miaoi, who advanced 200 years ago, both succeeded in forming their nascent souls at the age of 200 or 300. In the core formation realm, there are also cultivators like Master Taoist Lingxi and Master Taoist Shoujing who advanced to the nascent soul realm around 100 years old and are very likely to advance to the nascent soul realm before 200 years old. Do you think it's impossible? But Qiu Jiming was still confused. Junior Marshal Brother Jiang clearly said that when they met, Junior Marshal Sister Yi was still an individual cultivator. Aren't cultivation geniuses nurtured by the school since they were young? Do you think they didn't miss it? Ren Yufeng's face was full of disdain. Among individual cultivators, the method of testing spiritual roots isn't complete. Maybe they simply didn't test this junior martial sister Ye's real aptitude. Besides, the fact that she could enter Xianqing school already shows that her aptitude isn't bad. Xianqing school is an Arjingfa sect. In the northernmost area, anyone with spiritual roots can join. In a large cultivation group like Xianqing school, they even pick cultivators with 3 spiritual roots. Qiu Jiming didn't say anything. Although Ren Yufeng's temperament wasn't good, he couldn't compare to him in terms of intelligence. Besides, whether Mo Chenga was a genius or not didn't have much to do with him. In any case, Mo Chenga wouldn't save him. This Yi Xiaotian is Lord Daoist Xuanin's disciple. Even though Lord Daoist Xuanin hadn't formed his nascent soul when she accepted him as her master, how could a late-stage core formation cultivator casually accept a disciple? Besides, she herself said she hadn't built her foundation when she entered Xianqing school, but she advanced from the aura refining realm to the middle stage of the foundation building realm in just a dozen or so years. With this kind of cultivation speed, how could she not be a genius? Ren Yufeng paused for a moment, then shook his head and said with a sigh, "What a pity. Such a young middle-stage foundation-building female cultivator. If I could use her as a human furnace, it would definitely be very good." As if he was imagining some scenes, evil aura appeared in his eyes. Inside the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga, who saw this scene, slammed her palm on the table. Ever since she entered Xianqing school, she had never seen anyone who wanted to use her as a human furnace. Human furnaces were heretical, and Xianqing school was an orthodox Dao school. Dao schools advocated purity of heart and few desires, so the path of plucking wasn't suitable for them. At most, it was only dual cultivation. Besides, as soon as she entered the school, she became Lord Daoist Jinghe's registered disciple, so no one really dared to use her as a human furnace, not even if they wanted to. Outside, Qiu Jiming looked at Ren Yufeng with trepidation, not daring to say anything. After thinking for a while, Ren Yufeng regained his composure and shook his head regretfully. "I actually let her escape. I really want to know what it's like to humiliate this kind of proud son of heaven. But it's not like I don't have a chance. When I finish practicing the Divine Dragon Secret technique and my cultivation level improves greatly, I'll go to Kunwu. Maybe I'll run into her." Inside the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga was furious upon seeing Ren Yufeng's arrogant behavior. Zhengfa sect was also a Dao school, so it also didn't advocate the path of plucking. This Ren Yufeng became this shameless just because he obtained the Divine Dragon Secret technique. His heart must have been very dirty in the past. Looking at Ren Yufeng's evil smile outside, Mo Chenga suddenly felt uncomfortable when she thought he might be fantasizing about her. She really wanted to slap that hateful face then chop him into pieces. After taking several deep breaths, she finally calmed down and sat down again. Thinking about this now was useless. If she wanted to kill Ren Yufeng, she had to think about it carefully. In fact, compared to Ren Yufeng, it wasn't like she didn't have any advantages. First of all, she could eat medicinal pills inside the virtual sky world, and the spiritual aura was very abundant. It was an excellent cultivating environment. She'd suppressed her cultivation level for several years, so it wouldn't be a problem for her to advance to the late stage of the foundation building realm now. It was just that there was some danger in advancing to the core formation realm, but it didn't mean there was no chance. Secondly, the origin of Ren Yufeng's cultivation technique was strange. Who knew what the consequences would be? Cultivation techniques from the devil path made it easier for her to suffer from aura deviation, and Ren Yufeng had a demonic barrier since a long time ago. Maybe he'd make a mistake in his cultivation and he'd just give up. Lastly, Ren Yufeng didn't know she was inside the virtual sky world, so she could definitely look for an opportunity to sneak attack him. Mo Chenga thought about all these things again and again. In the end, Mo Chenga decided that before she came up with a better idea, she'd just cultivate here. She believed that if she just wanted to waste time, Ren Yufeng wouldn't be able to defeat her. Because she, who had taken longevity pills, had at least 800 years left to live. Chapter 187. After another round of cultivation, Mo Chenga opened her eyes. She had been in the virtual sky world for a month, but the situation outside hadn't changed at all. Ren Yufeng was still cultivating his Divine Dragon Secret technique, and Qiu Jiming was still alive. Jiang Shanghong and Tang Feng must have escaped, but no one entered the underground palace. Perhaps even nascent soul cultivators couldn't open the entrance after the underground palace was closed, so Ren Yufeng was so sure. Ren Yufeng probably also felt bored being locked up in the underground palace alone, so not only did he not kill Qiu Jiming, but he also specially created a waterproof barrier to let him live. Seeing as Ren Yufeng gradually lost his killing intent, Qiu Jiming felt a lot more relieved and started to cultivate slowly. From Mo Chenga's point of view as a bystander, Qiu Jiming probably wouldn't die for the time being. No one knew how long they would be locked up in this underground palace. If Ren Yufeng wanted someone to accompany him, Qiu Jiming wouldn't die. Maybe Ren Yufeng thought she needed a servant, so he might even give Qiu Jiming some benefits. Of course, these things didn't have much to do with her right now. The most important thing for her now was to cultivate as soon as possible and compete with Ren Yufeng to see whose cultivation progress was faster. Mo Chenga knew that closed-door meditation here would do her more harm than good. During this period of traveling outside, both her body and mind had grown. Advancing to the late stage of the foundation-building realm wasn't a problem, but it was still far from the right time to advance to the core formation realm. If she forced a breakthrough, her inner demon would probably be difficult to overcome. But doing nothing obviously wouldn't do, so after realizing this, Mo Chenga began to rummage through the books in the virtual sky world, looking for a solution. Among these books she found some medicinal pills that could help her advance, and some of them had the effect of protecting the heart and calming the mind. In the following time, Mo Chenga cultivated and concocted these medicinal pills at the same time. Although they couldn't fundamentally solve the problem in any case, it was better than nothing. 8 months passed in the blink of an eye. Yin's spiritual aura of the 5 elements filled her whole body and circulated frantically in her meridians. Mo Chenga knew she was about to advance to the late stage of the foundation-building realm. She didn't panic at all. She breathed orderly while slowly guiding the spiritual aura to flow in her meridians. This kind of small realm advancement had a great impact on aptitude. If she still had the aptitude of 5 spiritual roots in the past, after she built her foundation, she would have to expend a lot of effort every time she made a small realm advancement. But now that she had changed her cultivation to the Sunu art of the origin, she wouldn't face any bottlenecks when it came to minor breakthroughs. As long as she was careful, it wouldn't be a problem. Spiritual energy continued to accumulate in her dantian, and the spiritual energy around her frantically surged towards her. Mo Chenga calmly absorbed the spiritual aura and stored it in her dantian, circulating it like this. Finally, his dantian was stuffed to the brim, unable to contain any more spiritual energy. Mo Chenga immediately stopped absorbing spiritual aura and started to circulate the almost blocked spiritual aura inside her dantian. Under her deliberate guidance, the spiritual energy began to circulate from her dantian to her meridians, and finally returned to her dantian. The circulation of spiritual energy became faster and faster, almost forming a vortex. It was as if his body had become a universe, with countless stars revolving around the center point. Suddenly the stars moved to the extreme. With a rumbling sound, they collided with each other, striving to be the first to fight for a vaster world. The universe, under this pressure, suddenly expanded. Mo Chenga opened her eyes covered in sweat. She didn't have time to wipe off the wet stains on her face. She first checked her body and was delighted. Sure enough, she'd advanced to the late stage of the foundation-building realm. A small realm advancement wasn't as difficult as a big realm advancement. The density of spiritual aura wouldn't change, but her dantian would expand a bit. Mo Chenga only stopped after she felt her whole body was very carefree and there weren't any lingering problems caused by her realm advancement. She'd advanced to the late stage of the foundation-building realm, but she wasn't too happy. The late stage of the foundation-building realm wasn't a big deal. Ren Yufeng was already in the late stage of the foundation-building realm. Judging from his behavior after using the so-called Divine Dragon Secret technique, his strength must have reached the core formation realm, so she still couldn't do anything to him. In all fairness, Mo Chenga didn't think Ren Yufeng would quickly become a high-level cultivator after obtaining this Divine Dragon Secret technique. Not to mention that this Divine Dragon Secret technique looked really strange. He didn't have any Divine Dragon's breath on his body, and instead, his whole body was covered in devil aura. As for herself, with her spiritual roots of the origin, pure Yin constitution, and Sunu art of the origin, she didn't think she'd be much slower than Ren Yufeng if she cultivated with all her might. Therefore this was actually a race of time. Ren Yufeng's Divine Dragon Secret technique or her Sunu art of the origin would make realm advancements faster. As long as her cultivation speed surpassed Ren Yufeng's, there'd definitely be a day when she could openly go out and behead Ren Yufeng. Mo Chenga sighed softly, then tore open the crack in the sky of the virtual sky world to observe the situation outside. Ren Yufeng and Qiu Jiming were still cultivating. In the past few months she occasionally heard their conversations. Qiu Jiming could be considered to have completely fallen. Under Ren Yufeng's oppression for the sake of survival, he'd already become a pitiful person who attached himself to Ren Yufeng and only knew how to be a yes-man. Coincidentally, when she successfully advanced to the late stage of the foundation building realm, Ren Yufeng, who was outside, also stopped cultivating. When Ren Yufeng was cultivating just now, Mo Chenga noticed that the black aura on his body was getting thicker and thicker until it almost submerged his whole body. However, if this black aura was regarded as spiritual aura, Ren Yufeng's realm was still equivalent to the early stage of the core formation realm. He hadn't advanced again. Upon observing this, Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief. This showed that even if Ren Yufeng obtained the Divine Dragon secret technique, he still couldn't become a great cultivator with an extremely high cultivation level in one go. Instead, he had to cultivate step by step. In this case, she was quite confident that her cultivation speed wouldn't be much slower than Ren Yufeng's. Ren Yufeng, who stopped cultivating, seemed a bit confused. Perhaps he also encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation. He pondered for a moment, then took something out of his Chenkuan bag. Mo Chenga's eyes widened when she saw what he was doing. The thing Ren Yufeng took out was none other than a thick and heavy stone tablet. Qiu Jiming once said that the first time Ren Yufeng entered the underground palace, he obtained a stone tablet which recorded the Divine Dragon secret technique for obtaining the Divine Dragon's breath. Therefore, Ren Yufeng fabricated some lies to make them think there were a lot of treasures in this underground palace so he could use them to enter this underground palace again. Ren Yufeng seemed a bit emotional when he took out the stone tablet. He sighed while caressing the surface of the tablet. Then he straightened the stone tablet, then stared at it attentively as if he was studying it. Mo Chenga couldn't clearly see the contents of the stone tablet from where she stood, but that didn't prevent her from seeing its general content. As Qiu Jiming said, the tablet was engraved with lines similar to paintings. Ancient characters had just been invented, so most of them still used murals as a method of recording. This stone tablet came from the ancient sacrificial temple in the underground palace, so it wasn't wrong to use paintings to record it. The content of the painting engraved on the tablet was very simple. A person was standing in front of a dragon skeleton, seemingly using some kind of secret technique. There were also many human bodies in some postures next to him. There were also several kinds of lines drawn inside the human bodies, which seemed to be the way spiritual aura circulated. Presumably, this was the Divine Dragon secret technique Ren Yufeng mentioned. In addition, some simple characters seemed to be engraved next to some of the postures, but Mo Chenga didn't recognize these ancient characters. The term ancient era was used from the perspective of mortals. For cultivators, it could be summarized as the distant past, divine destruction, and Middle Ages. Since the beginning of the world, the immemorial era had been passed down for millions of years. The immemorial era that cultivators knew a lot about was a few 100,000 years after the gods established the rules of ascension. During those several 100,000 years, people with great divine power emerged one after another. Everyone yearned to ascend, and there were many people who ascended and became immortals. During that period of time, many characters and cultivation techniques were left behind, and some lucky people still obtain them even today. Many cultivators studied the characters and understood their meaning. Mo Chenga's virtual sky world was left behind during that period, so the characters inside it didn't hinder her. However, no one in the current cultivation world could recognize these ancient characters from several million years ago. Presumably, Ren Yufeng also didn't recognize them. Right now, he was frowning, trying to figure out the characters on the stone tablet bit by bit and making some movements from time to time. A thought flashed in Mo Chenga's mind. Since Ren Yufeng doesn't understand characters, could it be that the so-called Divine Dragon secret technique he comprehended is fundamentally wrong? Or maybe it's not a Divine Dragon secret technique at all, but a kind of evil art? The more she thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Otherwise, how could absorbing the Divine Dragon's breath make him look like he was covered in devil aura? Could it be that Ren Yufeng himself didn't realize something was wrong? Outside the virtual sky world, Ren Yufeng also seemed puzzled, as if he couldn't understand something. At that moment, Qiu Jiming also stopped cultivating. He looked at Ren Yufeng with a bit of fear and curiosity. He was no longer worried that Ren Yufeng would kill him, but facing Ren Yufeng made him even more afraid. During the past year, Ren Yufeng's oppression had carved this fear in his heart. Now when he saw Ren Yufeng's appearance, he habitually obeyed. At that moment, Ren Yufeng sighed and seemed to be talking to himself. Divine Dragon's Breath, Divine Dragon's Breath. Qiu Jiming hesitated for a moment, then asked cautiously, Senior Martial Brother Ren, is there a problem? Ren Yufeng glanced at him, stopped pondering and said faintly, Nothing, I just have some problems comprehending this cultivation technique. Qiu Jiming didn't dare to ask again and just sat on the side in silence. Ren Yufeng pondered for a while, then said, Divine Dragon's Breath. Why would it be like this after absorbing it? Mo Chenga was shocked. Mo Chenga was stunned. So Ren Yufeng also thought it was very strange? Sure enough, Ren Yufeng continued to say, According to what's written on this stone tablet, absorbing the Divine Dragon's Breath will make you a son of the Divine Dragon. Your momentum will be vast and your breath will be holy, but... Upon hearing what he said, Mo Chenga was 80% sure that Ren Yufeng must have cultivated the wrong cultivation technique. However, Ren Yufeng seemed to be unaware of this. He still muttered to himself, maybe this cultivation technique was originally like this? When he said that, Qiu Jiming interrupted while trembling with fear, Senior Martial Brother Ren, is it possible that you comprehended the wrong cultivation technique? Once Qiu Jiming said that, Ren Yufeng's expression changed. He shouted fiercely, Impossible. I've obtained the Divine Dragon's Breath. How could it be wrong? If it's wrong, how could I possibly have such great power? Yes. How could Qiu Jiming dare to refute him? It must be because I haven't cultivated it to perfection. If I succeed, I can definitely transform into a divine dragon's body. Ren Yufeng said resolutely. He put away the stone tablet, then sat down again to continue cultivating. Mo Chenga, who was inside the virtual sky world, shook her head. Ren Yufeng was already possessed. This cultivation technique was definitely wrong, even if it allowed Ren Yufeng to obtain power. How could the divine and pure Divine Dragon's Breath possibly produce Black Devil aura? However, it would be good if something happened to Ren Yufeng while cultivating. It was very easy to make mistakes while cultivating devil techniques. If he was possessed by the devil, killing him would be very easy. Just as she was about to close her eyes and continue cultivating, she suddenly realized something. So she opened her eyes again. Inside the virtual sky world, everything was calm, but outside the virtual sky world, it seemed to be shaking. Ren Yufeng stopped cultivating and Qiu Jiming also opened his eyes. The two of them looked around, puzzled and surprised. Qiu Jiming shouted, Senior Martial Brother Ren W, what's going on? Ren Yufeng frowned. His face was also full of confusion. The huge indoor square was shaking. From inside the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga could clearly see that the dragon bones in the square were also shaking. Ren Yufeng's expression changed several times. He closed his eyes and released his divine sense. Gradually his face turned paler and paler. The 15th day of the 8th month. It's the 15th day of the 8th month. Mo Chenga was stunned, but soon her expression also changed. On the 15th day of the 8th month, the land of Hiding Dragon would undergo drastic changes. The scenery inside would completely change and it would be completely different from the previous year. After the 15th day of the 8th month, the disciples who stayed in the land of Hiding Dragon would never appear again. This was something Jiang Shanghong specifically emphasized before they entered the land of Hiding Dragon. They had stayed in this underground palace for more than 8 months. Before they came in, they mentioned that they had discovered this underground palace in the land of Hiding Dragon 3 months ago, just after the 15th day of the 8th lunar month. Now that it had been a year, the scenery of the land of Hiding Dragon was going to change. Mo Chenga vaguely remembered this matter, but she always thought she wouldn't be affected while she was inside the virtual sky world. Now it seemed she indeed wouldn't be affected. The outside was shaking, but the inside of the virtual sky world was safe and sound. However, now that things had come to this, she was still a bit worried. If this underground palace disappeared, where would the virtual sky world appear? Would it disappear along with the underground palace, or would it stay where it was? Ren Yufeng and Qiu Jiming, who were outside, were already panicking. Ren Yufeng was no longer a foundation-building cultivator, but he was still at a loss regarding this kind of unknown matter. Senior Martial Brother Ren, what should we do? What should we do? Qiu Jiming sounded like he was crying. The underground palace was shaking more and more violently, and the dragon skeleton seemed like it would collapse at any time. Ren Yufeng, who was in a bad mood, shouted angrily, "Be quiet." Qiu Jiming didn't dare to refute him, so he swallowed his voice. However, his whole body went limp and he stared at Ren Yufeng in a daze. Ren Yufeng thought for a while, but he seemed to have no idea. Obtaining the power of the divine dragon's breath made him forget the rule that the land of hiding dragon changed every year. Why did the scenery of the land of hiding dragon change every year? Where did the scenery of the previous year go? These questions had never been answered by anyone for several thousand years. The whereabouts of those disciples who stayed in the land of hiding dragon and didn't leave were also unknown. After they disappeared, they never came back. The ground shook more and more violently. They were already floating in the water, unable to stand still. This won't do. I can't do this, Ren Yufeng muttered to himself. He then forced himself to sit cross-legged and moved his spiritual aura. Mo Qiange didn't know what he wanted to do, but he obviously had a countermeasure. Ren Yufeng moved his spiritual aura and gathered his spiritual aura. The black aura on his body became more and more intense, and the divine dragon's breath on the dragon skeleton started to rush madly towards him. He wanted to forcibly absorb the divine dragon's breath to improve his cultivation level. Mo Qiange's expression changed. She didn't know what the consequences would be. According to reason, devil cultivation techniques could easily lead to spiritual energy deviation, especially when one tried to forcibly improve their cultivation level. However, this so-called divine dragon secret technique was something from several million years ago. Who knew whether it was a bit special or not? Besides, if Ren Yufeng succeeded, his cultivation level would be even higher. At that time, it would be difficult for her to kill this person and even escape. Of course, it'd be best if he failed or if he was taken to an unknown place by the land of hiding dragon. At least she could escape safely. The divine dragon's breath crazily rushed towards Ren Yufeng. The black aura on his body began to surge and gradually covered his whole body. At that moment, the underground palace shook even more violently. The dragon skeleton that had been placed there for several million years finally made a kacha sound. No one knew where it started, but it suddenly collapsed with a loud rumble. First, the skull rolled down, then the huge spine. One by one, the ribs were washed away by the water, and the tailbone slowly separated. The huge and majestic divine dragon skeleton instantly turned into a pile of white bones and scattered with the water. Qiu Jiming, who was floating in the water, was hit by a huge dragon skeleton. He felt dizzy and lost consciousness. Ren Yufeng, on the other hand, was still operating his cultivation technique. Right now he was completely covered by the black aura, so he couldn't be seen at all. Mo Qiange watched this scene anxiously. She hoped Ren Yufeng didn't succeed and hoped she wouldn't be affected inside the virtual sky world. After an indeterminate amount of time, the underground palace was still shaking. Ren Yufeng suddenly opened his eyes and screamed, "Ah!" The black aura on his body gradually dispersed, revealing his face. His complexion was deathly pale, his body was skinny, and he looked like a skeleton. However, his eyes were emitting a pitch-black light. Mo Qiange was gobsmacked. In the past few months, Ren Yufeng had always been surrounded by the black aura, so she hadn't seen his real face. She never expected that a person who could be considered handsome and clean a few months ago would actually become like this. Even if she said he was a mummy, there might still be people who would believe her. Ren Yufeng once again put his palms together. Black aura emerged from his palms in circles, wrapping around Ren Yufeng like a silkworm spinning a cocoon. More and more black threads appeared. Starting from Ren Yufeng's feet, they quickly wrapped around him. At that moment, the underground palace had been completely turned upside down. Mo Qiange stared fixedly at Ren Yufeng. She saw that the black threads on his body didn't stop winding around his waist and abdomen, all the way up to his head. In the end, they wrapped around his head tightly, firmly wrapping around his entire body. Outside the underground palace, a loud bang finally rang out. In the virtual sky world, Mo Qiange saw countless boulders starting to collapse. This ancient building was built bit by bit using boulders as tall as 2 people, and each boulder weighed 1,000 kilograms. But now, the boulders of this underground palace started to disintegrate. The 4 walls and the ceiling were washed away by the water and fell down one by one. The water surged violently, dragon bones floated everywhere, and boulders fell from the sky. Mo Qiange regretfully saw that when these boulders hit Ren Yufeng's body, they were all blocked by the huge black cocoon on his body. As for Qiu Jiming, he was already buried somewhere unknown by the boulders. After an indeterminate amount of time, everything finally calmed down. The water flow was no longer violent, the boulders also stopped, and even the water was slowly flowing away. Mo Qiange, who was safe and sound inside the virtual sky world, saw a ray of light coming from somewhere. Chapter 188. Elder sister, look. In the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga heard the childish voice of a child. She slowly opened her eyes and looked outside through the virtual sky world. Sunlight. Sunlight. Her eyes suddenly widened. Sunlight. It wasn't the glimmer of light coming through the water. It was indeed unobstructed sunlight. Yesterday, when the underground palace collapsed, she was safe and sound in the virtual sky world. She saw some light coming through the water, so she seemed to be not far from the surface. She couldn't figure out where she was, and seeing that Ren Yufeng also escaped, she was worried they were still in the land of hiding dragon, so she hid in the virtual sky world and didn't go out. Unexpectedly, when she opened her eyes today, the outside was completely different. There was no water, no rock walls blocking people's view, but sunlight. Bright sunlight. Xiaobao, don't run. Two children seemed to be playing outside, and their crisp and innocent voices could be heard. Elder sister, there's a very high mountain here. The children's voices were close to her ears. Mo Chenga looked around and found she seemed to be on a reef by the sea. Looking up, she saw the blue sky and bright sunlight. Looking down, she saw the rippling surface of the sea, and she could vaguely see the ruins and reefs below. Mo Chenga's heart skipped a beat. This definitely wasn't the land of hiding dragon, nor was it the northernmost sea, but below her was indeed the collapsed rocks of the underground palace. In other words, she and the underground palace had been moved elsewhere. Having reached this conclusion, she looked down to look for Ren Yufeng and the others. No, she couldn't find any traces of Ren Yufeng and Qiu Jiming. Qiu Jiming might be under the rocks, but Ren Yufeng was wrapped in black aura, so he should be easy to find. She didn't see him either. Could it be that he was washed away by the sea in the black cocoon after the collapse? This wasn't impossible. When the collapse ended, the scene she saw was still in the water. Maybe he was washed away by the turbulent water at that time. Thinking of this possibility, Mo Chenga sighed with relief. If that was the case, at least she could escape safely. Two children ran towards her. One was a naked boy about 4 or 5 years old, and the other was a girl about 7 or 8 years old. They were wearing dusty homespun clothes. Their skin was dirty, their cheeks were dry, and their hair was messy. Only their faces carried the innocence and kindness of children. Judging from their clothes, this place wasn't the extremely cold northernmost sea, but a relatively warm one. Mo Chenga smiled bitterly when she thought of this. She left West Kunwu, went to Wei country in the heartland, then entered Ziwei's Immortals cave in Jin country, then was transported to the northernmost glacier through the transporting formation. From the northernmost glacier, she inexplicably arrived at a new place. Just like that, she kept getting tossed around. The little boy raised his head and looked at the huge rock on the reef. He said to his sister, "Sister, look, the mountain." His sister curiously tilted her head and looked at it for a while before shaking her head. "This is not a mountain." "Why not a mountain?" The little boy's eyes widened. "Dad said that a mountain is a lot of rocks. There are a lot of rocks here." The girl shook her head and said to her brother, "No, I went to see the mountain with Dad. The mountain is very high and there are many trees and flowers growing on it." The little boy widened his big round eyes and looked at his big sister with a curious expression. "What are these?" This is a lot of stones," said the elder sister. "Sister." The little boy cheered when he saw something between the huge rocks. He ran over to pick up a snow-white object and raised his little hand. "Look, what's this?" The girl took the object from her brother's hand and looked at it curiously for a while before shaking her head. "I don't know." "Then let's take it back and ask Dad." "Oh, there's another one here." The girl also picked up a white hard object among the huge rocks. Mo Chenga could tell at a glance that it was a small toe bone of a dragon. Looking at the two children looking for dragon bones outside, she thought for a while, then touched the space between her eyebrows and came out of the virtual sky world. The fierce sea breeze blew on her sleeves. It was damp, but it wasn't cold. It seemed this place was very far from the northernmost glacier. The girl was the first to see her. She was stunned to see a person appearing out of thin air on the huge rock. The little boy also saw her, but he smiled with 2 dimples on his face. He pointed at Mo Chenga and clapped his hands. "Fairy. Sister, look, a fairy." Mo Chenga couldn't help but smile at his innocent and cute appearance. Once she came out of the virtual sky world, she immediately used her divine sense to scan the surroundings. She only felt relieved when she confirmed there were no traces of other cultivators. She gently floated down from the pile of boulders. She floated here and there without using any force, which frightened the girl. She pulled her brother back several steps and asked while trembling, What are you?" Mo Chenga smiled and said softly, "Little sister, don't be afraid. I'm just a passerby." Unexpectedly, what she said made the little girl even more afraid. She hugged her brother tightly and said, "Don't take my brother away, Emochenga felt strange. "Little sister, do I look like a bad person?" Before the girl could answer, the little boy already shouted, "No, you look like a fairy." Emochenga smiled. Being regarded as a fairy by such an innocent and cute child was always a happy thing. But this little girl's attitude was really a bit strange. After thinking for a while, she continued to say softly, "Little sister, why are you so afraid? I won't hurt you." The little girl's eyes were guarded as she stared at her for a while. Seeing that her attitude was indeed very kind, she slightly let go of her suspicions and said hesitantly, "Are you really just passing by?" Emochenga nodded with a smile, then asked curiously, "Why do you think I look like a bad person?" The girl hesitated for a moment and said timidly, "Father said that a lot of bad people have come to the village recently. They often catch children, boys like my younger brother." "Catch boys?" Emochenga wrinkled her brows. "A kidnapper?" When she was a child in Emo family's village, she once heard that there were kidnappers who specialized in abducting children. Most of them abducted boys. "Don't worry, I'm not a kidnapper," Emochenga said with a smile, trying to calm the girl's nervousness. "If you're worried, take me to see your father, okay?" The girl hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Okay, our village is over there. As long as I shout, the adults will come." Looking at the direction the girl was pointing, there was indeed a small house not too far away. However, if he shouted, he might not be able to hear it. The girl's words were obviously a warning to her. Emochenga couldn't help but smile. Although this girl was young, she was very vigilant and knew to protect herself and her younger brother. She was really smart and sensible. Seeing that Emochenga really didn't do anything, the girl felt a bit relieved. She took her younger brother's hand and led him to the small house. The little boy liked her very much. As they walked, he raised his head and talked to her. "Fairy sister, where did you come from? Did you come from the sea? Father said there's a fairy on the sea who blesses us and protects us." "And you can say that?" Emochenga nodded with a smile. "Why do you think I'm a fairy?" "Because fairy sister is very beautiful, just like the fairy mom said." The little boy raised his hand as if he wanted to hold her hand. The girl saw his movement and timidly looked at Emochenga's snow-white clothes. She hastily slapped her younger brother's hand away. "Xiaobao, your hands are dirty." The little boy named Xiaobao looked gloomy. He uttered an "oh" and put his hand down. Emochenga sighed inwardly. She then lowered her body and held the little boy's hand. "Don't worry, sister's clothes won't get dirty." Right now, she was wearing Xinqing School's Taoist robe, which was woven from Mount Taikong's cloud brocade. Even if ink was splashed on it, it would be clean after a shake. Xiaobao immediately smiled and said cheerfully, "It's really fairy sister. Mother said the fairy sister on the sea is very good to us. She's everyone's mother." Emochenga was a bit confused. Fairy sister and mother? However, she understood what the child meant. The fairy sister he mentioned should be the god worshipped by the fishermen here. The small house wasn't far away. She answered the little boy's questions along the way and soon arrived. Emochenga gave them a cursory glance. The small houses were all thatched cottages with grass roofs and mud walls. The best ones had stone walls. The residents' faces were dirty, their clothes were shabby, and their expressions were numb. Obviously their lives weren't good. When they entered the village, some residents were drying dried fish at the village entrance while chatting. When they saw Emochenga walking into the village with the two children, they all stopped and kept glancing at her. One of them boldly shouted, "Shui Clan's Nan, and who did you bring back?" The girl glanced at the person who asked and answered, "Uncle Nyo Air, this sister said she's just passing by." Passing by? The adults at the village entrance gathered together and looked Emochenga up and down. However, they didn't dare to speak and only dared to whisper to each other. The girl led her here and there until they finally arrived at a thatched cottage. Smoke was coming out of the cottage. Someone was washing in front of a big water tank in front of the cottage. "Mother," the girl called. The woman who was squatting and washing wild vegetables answered and said in a rough voice, "Where the hell did you go? I haven't seen you for a long time. Did you go crazy with your little brother?" The girl said, "Mother, we have a guest." "A guest?" The woman turned around and saw Emochenga standing not far from them. She hurriedly stood up and wiped her hands on her apron. "Oh, this young lady?" She was a bit uncertain. Emochenga was wearing Xinqing School's uniform. It was a Taoist robe, but it was different from the secular world. In the eyes of mortals, Calling her Taoist priest seemed too beautiful and calling her young lady seemed too plain. Emo Chenga didn't care about the way she addressed her. She smiled and said, "Greetings, sister-in-law. I was passing by and happened to meet these two children. I have some things I don't understand, so I came to ask." "Oh, I see." The woman felt a bit inferior in front of her. She combed her hair and tidied up her clothes before making an inviting gesture. "Young lady, our house is really simple and crude. If you don't mind, would you like to sit inside?" Emo Chenga nodded with a smile and followed her into the house. The moment she entered, she saw that it seemed to be a hall. In the cramped space there was a dining table and several stools. Although they were very old, they were still clean. On the wall facing the door there was a picture of a sea god. It seemed to be a goddess. The woman invited her to sit on the bench next to the dining table and said to the girl, "Nan, go cook. Mother will accompany the guest." The girl nodded and glanced at Emo Chenga, then went to the kitchen. Emo Chenga was lost in thought for a while. She thought about herself a few decades ago, when she was the same age as this child. "Young lady?" Emo Chenga regained her composure and smiled apologetically. "Sister-in-law, your daughter is obedient and capable. You're really blessed." The woman let out a sigh and waved her hand. "Young lady, you're too polite. This girl always goes out to play. But she's really capable. She can do whatever you ask her to do, and she can do it better than some adults. She also helps take care of her younger brother." It could be seen that although the woman didn't love her daughter on the surface, she was very proud of her daughter. Her smile was full of joy. Xiaobao also chimed in. "Sister is very good. She always takes me to play." His sister went to cook, but he refused to leave and still stayed by Emo Chenga's side. Only then did the woman notice that her youngest son was holding Emo Chenga's hand. She hurriedly came over and hugged him. "Xiaobao, quickly go wash your hands. Look at how you're playing." She then said to Emo Chenga apologetically, "Young lady, children don't know any better. Did they dirty your clothes? Come, wash them." Emo Chenga shook her head. "It's okay, they won't get dirty." She dusted her clothes and waved her hands. There wasn't even a speck of dust on them. The woman holding Xiaobao stopped when she saw Emo Chenga's actions. She seemed to be thinking about something, but eventually, panic appeared in her eyes. She said, Young lady, are you a fairy from Bichuan Court?" I'm sorry. I was as blind as a bat. I'll kowtow to you." After she said that, she knelt down and started to kowtow. Emo Chenga was surprised. She gently raised her hand and used her spiritual aura to block the woman's movements. She asked gently, "Sister-in-law, what are you doing? What fairy from Bichuan Court?" Upon seeing Emo Chenga's methods, the woman became even more convinced. She begged, "Fairy, please spare our lives. The children didn't do it on purpose, so I didn't recognize them." Emo Chenga felt helpless. She waved her hand and used her spiritual aura to lift the woman up. "Since you know I'm a cultivator, you should answer me properly. There's no need to do this." Yes. The woman nodded obediently. She held Xiaobao and shrunk behind Emo Chenga. Xiaobao was the only one who was completely unaware of this. He said curiously, "Mom, Sister Fairy is a good person, so why?" "Shut up." The woman covered Xiaobao's mouth and berated him. "Child, be obedient and don't interrupt." Xiaobao looked very curious, but he didn't dare to be disobedient. He just stared at his mother, the Sister Fairy in front of him, with his big round eyes. Emo Chenga was a bit confused. It was normal for mortals to revere cultivators, but this kind of fear wasn't normal no matter how she looked at it. Moreover, when the woman mentioned Bichuan Court, it sounded a bit familiar. Yes, it was that medium-sized cultivation group that specialized in accepting female cultivators. Yen Ruashu and the other two people she met in Ziwei's Immortal's Cave were from Bichuan Court. So Bichuan Court was built here? Sister-in-law, you should also sit. Upon hearing what Emo Chenga said, the woman waved her hands repeatedly. I don't dare. How could I dare to sit together with Fairy? Emo Chenga didn't force her. She thought for a moment, then asked, "Why are you so afraid of cultivators? You even said, Fairy of Bichuan Court. Is Bichuan Court here?" Astonishment flashed across the woman's eyes. She thought for a moment, then asked cautiously, "Fairy? You're not from Bichuan Court?" Emo Chenga shook her head. "I'm just a cultivator passing by this place. I have nothing to do with Bichuan Court." The woman heaved a sigh of relief and finally showed a hint of a smile. "Fairy, please don't blame me. I misunderstood." Emo Chenga smiled. "It's nothing. But sister-in-law, could you tell me the reason in detail?" The woman promptly nodded. Yes. She paused for a moment then said, Fairy, you might not know, but our eastern sea is too remote. Even the emperor can't control this place, so the biggest force here is Bishuan Court. Wait. Mo Chenga interrupted her, asking, Did you say this place is the eastern sea? Yes. The woman was surprised. Fairy, don't you know? Oh, Mo Chenga said faintly, I didn't pay attention on the way here. The woman didn't dare to doubt her and continued to say, In fact, the fairies of Bishuan Court don't really care about mortals like us, but we must not offend them. If we offend them. After a moment of hesitation, the woman changed the topic. Just now, I saw that Fairy's clothes weren't dirty, so I thought Fairy was from Bishuan Court. I see. To mortals, cultivators were always aloof and remote. Since Bishuan Court was here, the mortals here naturally revered them the most. Nevertheless, she really didn't expect she'd actually come to the Eastern Sea. The Eastern Sea was desolate. If she wanted to go back to Kunwu, she'd have to spend a lot of effort. The most convenient way was naturally to borrow the road from Bishuan Court, but Mo Chenga didn't really want to get in touch with them. Thinking up to this point made her frown. After watching for a while and seeing that the woman was still standing cautiously, Mo Chenga smiled. Sister-in-law, you don't have to be like this. I'm just passing by. I'll leave after I'm done asking around. Oh. Although Mo Chenga didn't release her spiritual aura pressure, knowing she was a cultivator already made the woman's heart feel heavy. Now that she heard what Mo Chenga said, she heaved a sigh of relief. She then said politely, Fairy, if you still want to ask anything, just ask me. There's nothing I don't know about the villages in the vicinity. If Fairy wants to ask about Linhai Town, my husband also knows about it. He'll be back soon. Mo Chenga smiled. I already know this is the Eastern Sea where Bishuan Court is located, so I don't have anything else to ask. There's only one thing I want to ask. Yesterday, were there any movements nearby? Movements? The woman was puzzled. She thought for a moment then said, When the tide rose yesterday there seemed to be thunder. Is that what Fairy wants to ask? Thunder? Mo Chenga pondered for a moment. What else? Xiaobao heard rumbling sounds yesterday. Today when I went out to play with elder sister, I saw a mountain. Xiaobao, who was in the woman's arms, interrupted. Mo Chenga was a bit interested in what this child said. Is it the mountain you saw me on? Xiaobao nodded vigorously. There wasn't a mountain yesterday, but when I went out to play with elder sister today, I saw one. In fact, the mountain he was talking about was nothing but a pile of rocks. Xiaobao stretched out his hand again. Fairy sister, look. This is what I found on the mountain. In his dirty little hand lay a pure white bone object. It was precisely the divine dragon bone he picked up. Mo Chenga looked at it then said to the woman with a smile, Sister-in-law, I happen to have something I want to ask you for help with. Upon hearing that she needed help, the woman promptly said, Fairy, please tell us what you need. Please go to the side of the mountain this child mentioned and help me pick up all these bones. Ha! The woman was dumbfounded. What kind of request is this? Mo Chenga took out a bag from her robe and put it on the table. For every bone you pick up, I'll give you a golden bead. She opened the bag, revealing a glittering golden bead the size of a finger. Chapter 189. Originally, Mo Chenga didn't intend to reveal her identity. She just wanted to use the gold, silver, and treasures of the secular world to let the fishermen here help her collect the dragon bones. She didn't expect this woman to be so astute and recognize her identity as a cultivator. However, the fishermen here revered cultivators so much, which made things easier. While revering them, she could also entice them with benefits so that they would work more diligently. Seeing this bag of gold beads, the woman's eyes widened. They lived in such poverty that the most they'd seen was some broken silver, which was already a lot of wealth. As for gold, they could only occasionally see it in the nearby towns. Mo Chenga coughed softly. Sister-in-law, if you can give me all the bones, then all these gold beads will be yours. This bag of gold beads was a gift from Yi clan when she left. It was more convenient to have treasures when she traveled in the secular world, so Mo Chenga didn't stand on ceremony and accepted it. Right now, it was just right for these mortals to work for her. The woman regained her composure. For a moment she didn't know how to answer. She was both happy and nervous. Fairy, are you telling the truth? Right after she said that, she slapped her own mouth. Of course I'm telling the truth. I was being too talkative. But what kind of bones are you talking about? Where are they? Mo Chenga smiled at Xiaobao. Xiaobao, you know where they are, right? Xiaobao promptly nodded. Fairy sister was talking about the mountain. As he spoke, his eyes widened with curiosity. Fairy sister, are these bones? Why are they different from the bones father told me about? Mo Tiange smiled but didn't answer Xiaobao's question. She took out a bag from inside her robe, handed it to him and said softly, Xiaobao, take your mother to the mountain to collect bones. You can eat these fruits, okay? These were the remaining bubble fruits. They tasted very sweet and were good for coaxing children. Xiaobao took a bubble fruit and took a bite. Sure enough, he was very happy. It's delicious. Seeing that he was happy, Mo Tiange said to the woman, Xiaobao knows where they are. You should go with him. The sooner you can collect them, the better. It's best if you call more people. Some bones are very big. You don't have to worry about others collecting them. Your family won't be able to collect them all. I'll reward you later. Yes. How could the madam dare to object? She hastily held her youngest son's hand and shouted, And don't cook any more. Go call your father back. She then turned towards Mo Tiange with a flattering smile. Fairy, please wait here. We'll go right away. Mo Tiange nodded with a smile and watched as the family started to get busy. Not long after, the man was called back by the girl. When he heard what his wife said, he hastily came over and kowtowed to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange left the girl behind to talk to her and sent the husband and wife to pick up the dragon bones for her. Knowing that Mo Tiange was a cultivator, the girl's attitude was respectful. She stood by the side and answered every question Mo Tiange asked. This was a small fishing village by the East Sea. Other than some similar fishing villages nearby, there was only one big city called Waterfront City. Behind Linhai Town was the cultivation group Bichuan Court. This place was too remote and didn't even have a country, so Bichuan Court was the biggest force here. The girl was still young and didn't know much. Mo Tiange calculated in her mind and roughly understood her current location. The Kunwu mountain range stretched across the southern part of the celestial pole all the way to the southeast. Demonic Mountain blocked the Devil Path in the northeast. Therefore, the southern part of the East Sea was Tiandao sect's territory while the northern part was the Devil Path's territory. Based on Mo Tiange's speculation, they were probably in a small part of the sea in the north. In other words, the Devil Path was most likely to be on their west side. Once she reached this conclusion, Mo Tiange felt a bit vexed. This place was very likely to be a part of the sea next to the Devil Path's Demonic Mountain, which was very dangerous. If they happened to run into the Devil Path, they'd be in a lot of trouble. It seemed the best way to leave this place was to find Bichuan Court. Since Bichuan Court was located here, they must have a safe way to communicate with the outside world. Of course, the most important thing for her now was to pick up the dragon bones. Although she didn't know what use the dragon bones from several million years ago had, the divine dragon's breath on them couldn't be faked, so they were definitely useful. However, there were too many dragon bones. When the underground palace collapsed, many of them must have been washed away by the water. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange felt it was quite a pity. If she could collect a whole set of dragon bones, it'd be more convenient for her to study them. Now she could only pick up as many as she could. After asking the little girl, Mo Tiange learned that this family's surname was Shui. Their father was called Shui-san, and their mother was called Shui-san's sister-in-law. She herself didn't have a name. She was the only girl in the family. When she was born, the adults only called her Nan, and others only called her Shui family's Nan. What kind of name was Nan? There were dozens of families here, and most of their daughters were called Nan when they were born. It wasn't until they got married that they became whose family's sister-in-law. When they got a bit older, they became whose family's mother-in-law. From birth to death, most girls didn't have a name. Seeing the girl's secretly envious gaze, Mo Tiange felt it was quite a pity. This pair of siblings was very smart. Although Nan was young, her speech was very logical and she knew to be wary of outsiders. Xiaobao was even smarter. It wasn't easy for a 4 or 5-year-old child to speak so fluently. Moreover, with his family's financial situation, he basically had no one to teach him since he was a child. Once Mo Tiange praised him, Nan immediately stuck out her little chest proudly. Xiaobao can already speak when he's just 1 year old. Everyone in our village says Xiaobao is like a star that descended from the sky. Father also said that when Xiaobao grows a bit older, he'll send him to the city to study. At that time, he'll find a job in the city and he'll be able to live like a city person. Mo Tiange asked with a smile, why didn't he take the county-level exam? Wouldn't he be able to become an official? Nan shook her head. Father said we can't go out for the rest of our lives. There are monsters living in the west. If we go there we'll be eaten. Emo Chenga frowned inwardly when she heard what Anan said. Sure enough, the monsters she mentioned must be people from the devil path. Anan continued to say, unfortunately I wasn't chosen by Bishuan Court. It'd be great if I could enter Bishuan Court. Emo Chenga was rather astonished. She asked, how does Bishuan Court choose its disciples? Anan answered, girls living near Linhai town will go to Bishuan Court to have their spiritual roots checked when they're 8 years old. If they pass they can enter Bishuan Court. At that time, their whole family can enter the city and live like a city person. As she spoke, Anan once again said proudly, however, I also have spiritual roots. The aunt who receives me at Bishuan Court said my spiritual roots are a bit lacking, so I can't enter Bishuan Court. Nevertheless, she's already recorded my name, so if they're short on maids they'll call me over. You also have spiritual roots? Emo Chenga was rather surprised. Among mortals, there weren't many people with spiritual roots, yet she happened to run into one. Anan nodded. Her face was slightly red. The aunt who receives me said I have 5 spiritual roots. Oh, I see. Emo Chenga nodded. 5 spiritual roots weren't considered rare. In her memory, Bishuan Court was a small cultivation group about the same size as Yunwu sect. Now that she knew it was located on the coast of the Eastern Sea, a small place sandwiched between the Devil Path and the Eastern Sea, it probably wouldn't be a problem for them to accept someone with 5 spiritual roots as a maid. Unfortunately, although Anan's spiritual roots weren't obvious, she had a good temperament and was also smart. In addition, since Bishuan Court's influence in this area was so big, it'd be better for her to collect all the dragon bones and leave as soon as possible to avoid news of this being leaked. Divine dragon bones from 1,000,000 years ago? Not to mention a small cultivation group like Bishuan Court, even the 7 great cultivation groups would be tempted by them. After some thought, Emo Chenga changed the topic. Right. You girls with spiritual roots can enter Bishuan Court, but what about boys? Bishuan Court only accepts female disciples, right? Anan nodded. And so boys can only be accepted as outer disciples by Bishuan Court unless their spiritual roots are very good. I heard from the aunt who receives them that male disciples can only be considered real Bishuan Court disciples after performing dual cultivation with a female disciple. Emo Chenga raised her eyebrows in astonishment. This Bishuan Court was really an anomaly. Not only was it built in such a strange place but it also had such strange rules. This place faced the Devil Path in the west, so mortals here couldn't leave this place their entire lives, so they could only enter Bishuan Court. Unfortunately, Bishuan Court was a cultivation group that only accepted women. Because of that, in Bishuan Court, the status of men was far inferior to that of women. This was an anomaly in the entire celestial pole. Emo Chenga roughly understood the situation in the Eastern Sea from Anan. In the afternoon, the people who picked up the dragon bones came back one after another. The Shui couple was indeed obedient. They mobilized the whole village to either carry the dragon bones, and all the dragon bones were picked up. The biggest one was a leg bone that required 4 or 5 people to carry. Emo Chenga gave the golden bead to Anan. Whenever someone came with a dragon bone, she would give it to them. For a large leg bone like this one, she would give them a bit more. After the villagers obtained the golden bead, they were still unsatisfied, so they once again agreed to go to the beach to search. This search lasted until nightfall. Emo Chenga wasn't in a hurry. She asked the fisherman's family for an empty house and waited for 2 more days until they couldn't find any more dragon bones. Most of these dragon bones must have been washed away when the underground palace collapsed. She tried to piece them together, but she only managed to piece together a leg bone and some scattered bones. However, it would be fine as long as she collected all the dragon bones here. If the people of Bishuan Court hadn't seen these dragon bones before, they wouldn't be suspicious even if they heard a strange cultivator was looking for some bones here. The fishermen here were also very happy to obtain her golden bead, especially the Shui couple. Mo Chenga gave them some more golden leaves so they worked even harder. After collecting the dragon bones, Mo Chenga asked the Shui couple about some things about Bishuan Court, then planned to leave. Sure enough, the Shui couple said that aside from the sea, they had no other way to communicate with the outside world. However, they only had a small boat, so going to the sea was very dangerous. Moreover, since ancient times they'd never known where the sea led. Mo Chenga then asked how the people of Bishuan Court left. The Shui couple didn't dare to talk nonsense, so they said that if she wanted to leave, she could go to Linhai town and ask around. Bishuan Court had a shop there. Mo Chenga was quite flabbergasted. Bishuan Court was the only cultivation group here, so why would they open a shop? After the Shui couple's explanation, she learned that although there was only one cultivation group here, there were many individual cultivators, especially male cultivators with low aptitudes. Since Bichuan court didn't accept them as disciples, they could only ponder the cultivation path on their own. After a long time, many small cultivation clans and individual cultivators appeared here. After staying in this fishing village for several days and dealing with the dragon bones, Mo Chinga decided to take a trip to Linhai town. If she wanted to return to Kunwu, asking Bichuan court for help was the most convenient way. Chapter 190. Xiaobao was very reluctant when he heard Mo Chinga wanted to leave the fishing village. Outsiders rarely came to the fishing village. Besides, Mo Chinga also gave him delicious food. He had never eaten such sweet fruits before. The Shui couple naturally wouldn't let their child fool around, so they hurriedly coaxed him. In the end, Mo Chinga gave Xiaobao several unimportant medicinal pills that were damaged from the concoction as if they were candy, finally coaxing him. All right. Mo Chinga glanced at the 4 members of the Shui family in front of her. Tell me, which direction should I go to Linhai town? Hearing the question, Shui-san quickly replied, Fairy, just head north. You'll reach Linhai city in about half a day's journey. For a foundation building cultivator like her, half a day's journey for mortals would only take about 10 minutes. Mo Chinga nodded. Thank you. Just as she was about to leave, Shui-san hastily called out, Fairy, Fairy, please wait. Mo Chinga stopped, turned around and asked, What's the matter? Although her attitude was calm, she was a cultivator after all, so she had to be imposing in front of mortals. Shui-san subconsciously became a bit timid, so he only mustered up his courage after Shui-san's wife bumped him on the back. This lowly one has a request. I sincerely hope Fairy can agree to it. What is it? Tell me. Seeing that Mo Chinga didn't refuse, Shui-san was delighted. He turned to look at an N and said, Fairy, my family's an N also has spiritual roots, but the fairies of Bichuan court said an N's spiritual roots are a bit poor, so she can only enter the group when she has a quota. Our Shui family finally has a child with spiritual roots, so this lowly one is very anxious. If my family's an N can? Shui-san's wife saw Mo Chinga frowning slightly, so she immediately bumped her husband again and took over the topic with a smile. Fairy, my husband can't explain it clearly, so I'll just say it directly. My family's and said that if she learns the law of immortality, she'll be chosen first next time. You can buy it in the Law of Immortality City, but what do you need to buy it? Spirit stones? How could I have that? These past few days I helped Fairy do a few things, so Fairy gave us a lot of gold. We shouldn't have asked for too much, but... You want the immortal technique, don't you? Mo Chinga interrupted her. The woman nodded and added, Fairy, we won't take your gold. We just want you to give us an immortal spell. If it's not enough, you can take whatever you like. How could a mere mortal fisherman have what he wanted? When Mo Chinga saw Ann staring at her nervously from the side, she raised her hand and stopped the madam's long-winded speech. All right, I understand. She took out several jade slips from her Chenkuan bag. After thinking for a moment, she put the jade slips back and took out a book. Ann was still immortal and couldn't use her divine sense. Gold is of no use to me. And can be considered to be fated with me, so I'll give this cultivation technique to you. Ann took the thin book. She was so excited that her face turned red. The Shui couple even pulled her to kowtow. Thank you, Fairy. Thank you, Fairy. Mo Chinga waved her hand and didn't say anything else. With a shake of her sleeves, she flew up with the wind. Shui-san's family, as well as all the villagers of this unknown fishing village, were attracted by this scene. Mo Chinga saw Ann's eyes full of hope and envy when she raised her head. She gave her a smile, then turned into a flight light and disappeared into the horizon. A beginner's cultivation technique was as easy as lifting a finger for her, but it was extremely difficult for this little girl who hoped to walk on the path to immortality. Mo Chinga didn't mind doing good occasionally. It could even be said that because she was born a mortal, she was kinder to mortals than to cultivators. However, whether she could really walk on the path to immortality depended on herself. She shook her head, threw these thoughts to the back of her mind, and focused on hurrying on her journey. Linhai town wasn't far. After 10 minutes, Mo Chinga could already see the city walls in the distance. What surprised her was that she originally thought Linhai town was only a small town in such a small place. She didn't expect its city walls to be so magnificent that they weren't inferior to some medium-sized cities in Middle-earth. What surprised her even more was that as soon as she approached Linhai town, her cloud-treading boots seemed to go out of control. It seemed, There was a flight restriction laid in the town. After thinking for a while, Mo Chinga landed outside the town and walked towards Linhai town on foot. It was noon, so there were only a few people going in and out of the town gate. There was only one soldier guarding the gate. He stood at the gate, leaning against the wall and dozing off, not caring about other people going in. Mo Chinga felt a bit strange. Didn't this Linhai town have no country? Why did it have soldiers? But the strangest thing was yet to come. Just as she was about to enter the town, the dozing soldier glanced at her in a daze and immediately woke up. He rubbed his eyes and ran to stop her. Soon after, the soldier respectfully saluted her and said, "Fairy, please wait." Mo Chinga raised her eyebrows and asked, "How did you know I'm a cultivator?" Her question made the soldier even more surprised. He blurted out, "Fairy, aren't you an immortal from Linhai?" Mo Chinga frowned but didn't answer. The doubts in her heart grew stronger. Seeing her unsightly expression, the soldier hastily said, "Fairy, please calm down. Immortals from Linhai all know we can distinguish mortals from immortals. Fairy doesn't seem to know, so I guessed Fairy isn't from Linhai." Mo Chinga nodded. "I'm indeed a foreign cultivator who came here by accident." "Why did you stop me? Could it be that Linhai town doesn't allow outsiders to enter?" The soldier waved his hand repeatedly. "Fairy, you misunderstood. There's no such thing. Our Linhai town is supported by master immortals and fairies, so how could we not allow Fairy to enter the town?" "Then why are you?" the soldier explained. "Individual cultivators from Linhai have to register in the register before entering the town, so Fairy, please leave your name." Mo Chinga felt a bit displeased. Linhai town's rules were really strict. She'd been to many places, but none of them dared to have such rules for cultivators. Cultivators hated being controlled the most. Not to mention that they had to leave their names in order to enter the town, which really made people feel conflicted. Upon seeing Mo Chinga's expression, the soldier explained, "Fairy, this is a rule set by the fairies of Bishuan Court. I'm just a mortal, so I'm only following orders. So if I don't leave my name, I can't enter the town?" Mo Chinga cast him a cold glance. Although she wasn't tall, the soldier couldn't help but feel a bit shorter in front of the aura a cultivator unconsciously emitted. Nevertheless, he still persisted and said, "I'm sorry, Fairy, these are the rules." Mo Chinga was now certain that the flying restriction over Linhai town was also set up by Bishuan Court. Apparently, Bishuan Court's influence in this area of the sea was extraordinary. Not only did it control a town, but it also controlled the individual cultivators in the vicinity. Mo Chinga thought for a moment, then said with a cold expression, "Where do you want me to leave my name?" The soldier was afraid of angering an immortal. Although he was working for Bishuan Court, an immortal like him couldn't afford to offend any immortal. Upon hearing what Mo Chinga said, he was delighted. He took a register from the side and handed it to her. "Fairy, please leave your name here." Mo Chinga flipped open the thick register. She saw many names written on it, and she clearly remembered when they entered and when they left. Without pausing, she took the pen the soldier handed her and wrote down the 3 words Yi Xiaotian in the blank space. She then threw the pen back and said, "Is this okay?" The soldier nodded repeatedly. It's okay. Fairy, please come in." Mo Chinga didn't say anything more and walked into the town. After she entered the town, the soldier carefully recorded her name. Yi Xiaotian, female, cultivation level unknown, entered the town at noon on the 20th of August. Mo Chinga felt quite unhappy. She originally had a bad impression of Bishuan Court because of the 3 female Bishuan Court disciples she met in Ziwei's Immortals Cave, but now her impression of Bishuan Court was even worse. Although Bishuan Court was the only cultivation group here, controlling other cultivators like this was really too overbearing. In Kunwu, not to mention a small cultivation group like Bishuan Court, even big cultivation groups like Tiandao Sect and Shenqing School never asked people to register their names in the towns at the foot of the mountain. Even in some private towns, the most they'd do was ask about someone's background and issue them an identification card. They'd never allow a mortal to record the comings and goings of cultivators like this. However, the fact that Bishuan Court dared to do this showed that they were very powerful. If she was in Kunwu, she wouldn't have to enter the town, but here, this was the only big town. If she didn't want to have a falling out with Bishuan Court, she could only register her name. Mo Chinga helplessly made this choice and entered the town. In any case, her name was fake and Yi Xiaotian didn't have any reputation, so it didn't matter if she told others. However, this matter gave her an idea. Bishuan Court was so overbearing. What if she cut off her path of retreat when she asked them for a passage? She was alone now. No matter how bad Bishuan Court was, they still had several core formation cultivators. That being the case, she might as well make some inquiries and ask others about Bichuan Court's situation in the Eastern Sea. After making up her mind, Mo Qianga observed the situation in Linhai Town. If she didn't know about it in advance, she really wouldn't have expected Linhai Town to be in such a desolate place like the coast of the Eastern Sea. The wide streets and the numerous buildings weren't any worse than those in the Middle Territory. However, the residents here were still somewhat different. For example, most of them were dressed like fishermen. Even the customers sitting in the restaurants on the street wore very ordinary clothes. Presumably, this place didn't have many products, so there were no gorgeous brocades. Mo Qianga pondered for a moment, then turned into an extraordinarily lively restaurant and walked directly to the shopkeeper. Just as she was about to speak, the shopkeeper raised his head and immediately showed a respectful expression. "Fairy, please come in, please come in." Mo Qianga was rather puzzled. Forget about the soldiers guarding the gate. Since they were sent to guard the city gate, they must know how to distinguish mortals from cultivators, but how could this ordinary shopkeeper actually recognize her at a glance? "Shopkeeper." Mo Qianga didn't move. "How did you recognize that I'm a cultivator?" The shopkeeper looked surprised. "Fairy, aren't you a local?" The fat shopkeeper rubbed his hands and explained with a smile, "Immortals in Linhai all live together with us mortals. After a long time we can recognize you at a glance. Fairy's bearing is calm and graceful like a fairy, you must be an immortal without a doubt." "Oh, I see." Mo Qianga nodded. "I'm indeed not a local. Oh, it's rare to see immortals from other places. Fairy, whatever you eat or drink today, it's all free of charge." Mo Qianga shook her head lightly. "I didn't come to eat or drink. I just wanted to inquire about some information from the shopkeeper." Chapter 191. Once she left the restaurant, Mo Qianga already had a destination in mind. She walked straight along the main street. After walking for a short distance, she saw a very luxurious blue cloud building in the center of the city. As soon as she entered the restaurant, a waiter immediately came to greet her with a big smile. "Fairy, please go upstairs, please go upstairs." Mo Qianga nodded and followed the waiter all the way to the third floor. As soon as she reached the third floor, she immediately felt several gazes on her. She discreetly sized up her surroundings. Compared to the first floor, the third floor was less luxurious, but it was more elegant. There were about 5 or 6 mahogany tables in the spacious space. Each table was separated by flowers and trees, looking extremely elegant. There were already 3 tables occupied by guests. All of them were male cultivators, and their cultivation levels were all in the aura refining realm. Mo Qianga thought to herself that Bichuan Court was, after all, a small or medium-sized cultivation group. If individual cultivators could cultivate to the foundation building realm, they would have been recruited long ago, even if they were male cultivators. At the first table, there were 2 middle-aged men who were chatting animatedly. When they saw Mo Qianga, they glanced at her with some surprise, but they soon turned back to continue their conversation. At the second table, there were both young and old people who were chatting casually. Upon seeing her, several people stared at her as if they were trying to guess her origin. At the third table, there were 3 young people chatting loudly. They seemed to be the children of some cultivation clans. They weren't as down and out as individual cultivators. "Fairy, this way please." The waiter led Mo Qianga to an empty table and swiftly served her tea. He asked, "Fairy, what would you like to order?" Mo Qianga muttered to herself for a moment, then said, "Some refreshments will be fine." "Yes, yes," the waiter said repeatedly. "Please wait a moment, Fairy. It'll be served soon." After the waiter went downstairs, Mo Qianga picked up the teacup and took a leisurely sip. The manager of the small restaurant told her that in Linhai Town, most cultivators and mortals lived together. Mortals were very respectful to cultivators, so cultivators enjoyed a lot of power here. In Linhai Town, mortals treated both Bichuan Court disciples and individual cultivators with extreme respect. There were even some facilities specially prepared for cultivators, such as the third floor of the Azure Cloud restaurant. This was the biggest restaurant in Linhai Town. Reportedly, the boss had a very good relationship with the fairies of Bichuan Court. The third floor of the Azure Cloud restaurant was only open to cultivators. Any cultivator, even if they were only in the first layer of the aura refining realm, could eat and drink here for free. Therefore, no matter if it was the disciples of the sects, clans, or independent cultivators in the vicinity of Waterfront City, They would all come to the Azure Cloud brothel when they had nothing to do and exchange some news. After inquiring about these things, Mo Chinga didn't say anything else and came to this place. The reason why he didn't ask the shopkeeper directly was because the shopkeeper was, after all, a mortal. Some things were more reliable to hear from the mouth of a cultivator. As she sat there, she had already sized up all the people at the 3 tables. She had the spirit-concealing pendant with her, so she deliberately suppressed her cultivation level to make others feel that she was still in the aura-refining realm, but they couldn't see through her. Among the 8 or 9 cultivators here, the strongest one was only in the 6th layer of the aura-refining realm, so they didn't notice anything strange at all. Not long after the waiter went downstairs, the 3 young men at the 3rd table looked at each other. One of them got up and walked over to her. "Fellow Taoist, I'm Wei Ziming. Nice to meet you." Mo Chinga pretended to have just noticed him and stood up to greet him. "I'm Yi Xiaotian. Nice to meet you, fellow Taoist Wei." Seeing that she returned his greeting, a hint of joy flashed across Wei Ziming's eyes. He greeted her again. "So it's Miss Yi." Just now he called her fellow Taoist, but now he called her Mississippi. Mo Chinga smiled without batting an eyelid. "Fellow Taoist Wei is too polite. Is there something I can help you with?" "Oh, it's like this." Seeing that her attitude was kind, Wei Ziming also smiled from ear to ear. "I wonder if Miss is alone? If you are, it's fate that we met. How about we talk about the path of immortality together?" Mo Chinga was sitting there because she was waiting for someone to take the initiative to talk to her. Now that she heard Wei Ziming's words, she thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "How can I refuse fellow Taoist Wei's kindness? I'm also bored sitting here by myself, so I'll accept your invitation." Wei Ziming was overjoyed. "Miss, please come over here." He then shouted, "Waiter!" Thump, thump, thump sounds of footsteps could be heard from the stairway. A waiter immediately ran up with Mo Chinga's tea and pastries in his hands. Wei Ziming waved his hand and said, "Take our table away and bring another good one." The waiter's gaze shifted. He understood what Mo Chinga meant, so he immediately nodded and bowed. "Yes, yes." He then put the tea and pastries aside, tidied up the 3 people's table and went downstairs. Since the 3rd floor was specially set up for cultivators, the waiter's attitude was naturally attentive. Soon, several other people came up and once again served hot dishes, wine and delicacies. Cultivators in the 10th layer of the aura-refining realm and above would gradually lose their sense of worldly affairs. These people were all below the 10th layer of the aura-refining realm, so they naturally ate and drank like mortals. "Miss Yi, please." Wei Ziming smiled. The 2 young cultivators sitting at the same table with him also stood up with a kind attitude. Mo Chinga raised her hand to greet these people before sitting down. As soon as she sat down, Wei Ziming eagerly poured wine for her. "Miss Yi, let me introduce you. These are my 2 good friends Huang Jifeng and Yu Yang." Mo Chinga raised her head to look at the 2 of them. Wei Ziming had the demeanor of a distinguished young master. Huang Jifeng's demeanor was slightly inferior to his, but he was a bit more handsome. Yu Yang, on the other hand, was very shy and seemed to be the youngest among them. He seemed to be less than 20 years old. Among the 3 of them, the one with the highest cultivation level was Wei Ziming, who was in the 5th layer of the aura-refining realm. The other 2 were both in the 4th layer. Mo Chinga inwardly speculated that these 3 people were undoubtedly the children of cultivation clans. She was quite experienced now, so she usually wouldn't make a mistake. "I'm Yi Xiaotian. Greetings to the 2 fellow Taoists." She politely raised her hand to greet them. Her attitude seemed to make the 2 people feel somewhat flattered. They hastily returned her greeting while repeatedly saying they didn't dare. Mo Chinga felt a bit strange. Even if her cultivation level was higher than theirs, she only suppressed it to around the 7th layer of the aura-refining realm, so they didn't need to greet her like this. After the 4 people finished greeting each other, Wei Ziming raised his cup and said with a smile, "May I know which fairy of Bichuan Court is Miss Ye's disciple?" Mo Chinga smiled then said faintly, "I'm not a disciple of Bichuan Court." The moment she said that, the 3 of them were stunned. Wei Ziming blinked as if he didn't quite believe her. He then asked with a slight stutter, "Miss, you have this kind of cultivation level, but why aren't you a disciple of Bichuan Court?" Mo Chinga smiled and said, "To be honest, I'm an individual cultivator from Kunwu. I came here by accident, but I don't know how to leave." As she said that, Mo Chinga secretly paid attention to their reactions. However, she saw that all 3 of them had astonished expressions. Huang Jifeng glanced at his companion then asked, "Miss Yi isn't from Linhai?" Mo Chinga nodded. "Correct." The 3 people looked at each other. There seemed to be pleasant surprise in their eyes. In the end it was still Wei Ziming who spoke. His attitude was very enthusiastic. I really didn't expect Miss Yi to be an outsider. There are very few outsiders in Linhai, so it's also difficult for us to leave. Miss Yi, how did you come to Linhai? Mo Chenga smiled faintly. I came through a transporting formation. A transporting formation? The three people exclaimed in surprise. Soon afterward, Huang Jifeng said anxiously, Miss, do you know where there's a transporting formation that connects Linhai and Kunwo? It's not Bishuan Court's transporting formation, right? You've misunderstood. Upon seeing their reactions, Mo Chenga felt more confident. I came through a random transporting formation outside. I didn't come through a fixed transporting formation. Oh. Hearing her words, the three of them revealed a look of disappointment at the same time. Mo Chenga swept her gaze over them, thinking in her heart. At first, the three of them thought she was a Bishuan Court disciple, so they were both enthusiastic and polite to her. Bishuan Court was very powerful in Linhai, so female cultivator statuses were much higher than male cultivators, so the three of them wanted to befriend her. However, because Bishuan Court's female disciples had always been arrogant, they basically wouldn't be so polite to outsiders, so the three of them were rather flattered. When she said she wasn't a Bishuan Court disciple, not only were the three of them not disappointed, but they were also pleasantly surprised. Mo Chenga speculated that it was very likely because Bishuan Court's female disciples all had very arrogant attitudes. In Linhai, almost all women with spiritual roots entered Bishuan Court, so it was rare for the three of them to meet a female cultivator they could get close to, so they were pleasantly surprised. In the end, when they learned she came from the outside, the first thing they asked was about the transporting formation. They were very disappointed when they heard there was no transporting formation in Linhai. Apparently, aside from Bishuan Court, the cultivators here were also trapped in this small area and couldn't leave, so they were very interested in the transporting formation. Judging from this, the cultivators in Linhai also had no way to leave, so it was probably impossible for them to return to Kunwu without going through Bishuan Court. Once she finished thinking, Mo Chenga showed just enough surprise on her face. Fellow Taoists, is there no transporting formation here? Or a way out? Huang Jifeng shook his head then said with a bitter smile, Miss Yi, we won't hide this from you. Linhai is a small place isolated in the eastern sea by demonic mountain range. To the west of us is the Devil Path and to the east is the sea, there's basically no way out. Mo Chenga looked even more surprised, but there was also a hint of panic. Then what should I do? I still have to go back to Kunwo? Yu Yang, who'd been silent all this while, finally spoke. Miss Yi, you don't need to worry. If you were a male cultivator, it would indeed be difficult, but you're a woman so you can ask Bishuan Court for help. Mo Chenga looked puzzled. Fellow Taoist, what do you mean? Does Bishuan Court have a transporting formation to leave? Wei Ziming took over the conversation, but instead of answering he asked, Fellow Taoist, do you know anything about the cultivation world in Linhai? Mo Chenga nodded. After I arrived here I asked around so I know a bit about it. Wei Ziming continued to say, Bishuan Court is the only cultivation group in Linhai, and it's also a cultivation group for female cultivators. At this point, a hint of embarrassment appeared on his face. Therefore, the status of female cultivators is slightly higher than that of male cultivators. Female cultivators can enter Bishuan Court as long as they have spiritual roots, but male cultivators like us have to either have very good spiritual roots or have a high cultivation level in order to be accepted as outer disciples by Bishuan Court. Moreover, only after performing dual cultivation with a female disciple can they be considered real Bishuan Court disciples. The same goes for cultivators from outside Linhai. In recent years, although there were very few foreign cultivators, they'd occasionally come across foreign cultivators. If they were female cultivators, they'd either be recruited by Bishuan Court or they'd pay a certain price for Bishuan Court to send them out of Linhai. Male cultivators, on the other hand, weren't so lucky. If they wanted to leave, they'd have to pay an even bigger price. Therefore, Miss Yi, you can ask Bishuan Court for help. Maybe they'll be willing to let you go. Mo Chenga was silent for a while before she nodded. I see. Thank you, fellow Taoists, for telling me. Huang Jifeng hesitated for a moment then asked, Miss Yi, your cultivation level is higher than ours, so presumably Bishuan Court will definitely recruit you. If you're only an individual cultivator in Kunwu, it'd be better for you to join Bishuan Court. Bishuan Court is a cultivation group for female cultivators, so they take great care of their female disciples. If you join Bishuan Court, you might even have a chance to build your foundation. Mo Chenga looked embarrassed. But I want to go back to Kunwu, Wei Ziming said. Miss Yi, if you don't want to join Bishuan Court and want to go back to Kunwu, I have to remind you first. At this point he paused for a moment to confirm there was a sound-insulating barrier around them before he continued to say, Bishuan Court is very powerful in Linhai, they always mean what they say. If they really recruit you and you don't agree, it won't be good for you if you provoke them. Wei Ziming spoke very tactfully, but Mo Chenga could hear the warning in his words. Apparently her previous guess was right. Bishuan Court wasn't only powerful, but it was also very overbearing. They couldn't be offended easily. She thought for a moment, then said with a smile, Thank you for reminding me, fellow Taoists. Are all fellow Taoists local cultivators? Could it be that you've never gone out? Wang Jifeng smiled bitterly. To be honest, miss, we're all from small local cultivation clans. Not only have we never gone out, but none of the elders in our clans have either. It's all because of Linhai's special terrain that most of us Linhai cultivators have never gone out in our entire lives. But what can we do? Only Bishuan Court has a way to go out, but they're also unwilling to open the transporting formation. Wei Ziming sighed and said, Our biggest wish is to cultivate to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, enter Bishuan Court, successfully build our foundation, and perform dual cultivation with Bishuan Court's female disciples. That's the only way we'll have a chance to go out. Yu Yang said with a yearning expression, I heard from my father that an ancestor of our Yu clan once left Linhai. When he came back he told the younger generation that the outside world is very big. Kunwu alone has a whole mountain range that's tens of thousands of miles wide. Aura refining cultivators like us have to walk for more than half a year to reach it from the east to the west. There are also many cultivation groups outside. My ancestor said there are more male cultivators among the high-level cultivators in the outside world while female cultivators. At this point, Yu Yang stopped and cast a somewhat embarrassed glance at Mo Chenga. Miss Yi, please don't mind me. I was just speaking thoughtlessly. Mo Chenga smiled. It's nothing. What fellow Taoist you said is the truth. In Kunwu, there are indeed more male cultivators among the high-level cultivators. Seeing as she didn't mind, Yu Yang smiled gratefully then asked curiously, Miss Yi, you came from Kunwu. Can you tell us something about the outside world? All this. What do fellow Taoists want to hear? Upon hearing that she was willing to talk about the outside world, the three people's eyes brightened. Wei Ziming asked, Miss Yi, how big is Kunwu? Are there really a lot of cultivation groups? How many are the biggest? Are there a lot of nascent soul cultivators? This Wei Ziming was really impatient. He immediately asked a series of questions. Mo Chenga smiled and said, Don't worry, fellow Taoist Wei. Let me think. I also don't know how big Kunwu is. Based on the walking distance of a foundation-building cultivator, it would take them about a month to fly from east to west. As for aura-refining cultivators, just like fellow Taoist you said, it would indeed take them more than half a year. Based on this, it's at least several tens of thousands of miles, maybe even more. There are probably several hundred cultivation groups in Kunwu, but most of them are small cultivation groups. The entire cultivation group might only have several hundred people, and the highest cultivation level among them is only in the foundation building realm. Big cultivation groups, on the other hand, have several thousand aura refining disciples, more than 100 foundation building disciples and several nascent soul cultivators. Wow, so many people. Yu Yang exclaimed, Bishuan Court only has about 1,000 disciples, and there are only a few dozen foundation building cultivators. Is that so? Mo Chenga took this opportunity to ask, Then does Bishuan Court have any core formation cultivators? Yu Yang nodded. Bishuan Court currently has 3 core formation cultivators. Oh, if that's the case, they'd be considered a medium or small cultivation group in Kunwu. 3 core formation cultivators wasn't considered much in Kunwu. Back then, Yunwu sect also had 7 or 8 core formation cultivators, but Yunwu sect was only a medium cultivation group. For a medium cultivation group like this, if they had nascent soul cultivators, they could develop into a big cultivation group. If they didn't, they could only maintain the structure of a medium cultivation group. Upon hearing her understatement, Wei Ziming and the others said in amazement, Bishuan Court isn't considered a big cultivation group in Kunwu? Then what are Kunwu's big cultivation groups like? Do they only count if they have nascent soul cultivators? Mo Chenga nodded. Correct. Not to mention big cultivation groups, even some medium cultivation groups with great influence in Kunwu all have nascent soul cultivators. I reckon there are about 50 to 60 nascent soul cultivators in all of Kunwu, and most of them are in the 7 big cultivation groups. The 7 big cultivation groups? Huang Jifeng said, I've heard that 6 of the 7 big cultivation groups in the celestial pole are in Kunwu. They're very powerful, and there are also many nascent soul cultivators in their groups. Mo Chinga shook her head and said with a smile, how could there be many nascent soul cultivators? Reaching the nascent soul realm isn't that easy. Tiandao sect, which is known as the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, only has 7 nascent soul cultivators, and that's only when they were at their peak. 7 nascent soul cultivators. The 3 of them showed expressions of yearning. For them, nascent soul cultivators only existed in legends. It had been many years since a nascent soul cultivator appeared in Bishuan Court. It was said that aside from the founder of the group, there was only one nascent soul cultivator 1,000 years ago. After that person passed away, no one else was able to advance to the nascent soul realm, and there weren't many core formation cultivators either. Miss Yi, can you tell us more about the 7 big cultivation groups? If their previous attitude was polite, then right now, it already carried a hint of closeness and flattery. Although the 3 of them were children of cultivation clans and Mo Chenga claimed to be an individual cultivator, they lived in Linhai while she came from Kunwu, so she had seen much more of the world than them. Mo Chenga smiled. Of course it's nothing. The 7 big cultivation groups in the celestial pole are Tiandao sect, Xianqing school, Gujin sect, Zhengfa sect, Biyun sect, Lingshou school and Danding school. Among them, Zhengfa sect is located in the northernmost glaciers and has only one branch in Kunwu. Tiandao sect is known as the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole and has the largest number of disciples, about 6,000 to 7,000 aura refining disciples. While Mo Chenga told them about the outside world, she also slowly mentioned Bishuan Court. Seeing how straightforward she was, the 3 of them also told her about Bishuan Court without holding anything back. Linhai wasn't very big. It was only a big city with tens of thousands of fishermen and farmers living around it, so Bishuan Court's scale wasn't very big. Including the outer disciples, Bishuan Court's total number of disciples barely reached more than 1,000. There were 30 to 40 foundation building cultivators, 3 core formation cultivators, and a nascent soul cultivator that hadn't appeared for a long time. Among the 3 core formation cultivators, one was in the middle stage of the core formation realm while the other 2 were in the early stage. Bishuan Court's conduct had always been very overbearing. Because they were the only cultivation group in the area, it was inevitable that they would be arrogant and would often treat individual cultivators with a high and mighty attitude. Wei Ziming sighed. Unfortunately we can't go out. If we could, we'd definitely find a cultivation group and cultivate diligently. How could we possibly be bullied by a group of women? Mo Chenga looked up at him. Fellow Taoist Wei, do you think you're being bullied by women? Realizing he said something wrong, Wei Ziming promptly smiled and said, Miss Yi, please don't misunderstand. It's just that Bishuan Court's conduct is indeed a bit overbearing. Usually their words are the law in Linhai, so I'm just a bit. Mo Chenga smiled and said faintly, so what if Bishuan Court isn't a cultivation group for women? As long as it's powerful, it's inevitable that it'll be overbearing. Women aren't the only ones. Yes, Missy is right. Wei Ziming smiled apologetically. I misspoke. Mo Chenga waved her hand. It's nothing. She paused for a moment then sighed. Not to mention anything else, the founder of Bishuan Court is really amazing. Women in cultivation are always trapped by their emotions and aren't decisive enough. It's already very rare for this founder to be able to establish such a foundation here. These were her heartfelt words. There were also cultivation groups for women in Kunwu, but none of them were as powerful as Bishuan Court. Most of them were just small cultivation groups under the control of others. Bishuan Court dominated the area. Although this was due to the terrain, it wasn't easy for them to establish such a cultivation group. That's true. Huang Jifeng's eyes shone with admiration. Although we don't like Bishuan Court's way of doing things, no one in Linhai City is dissatisfied with the founder of Bishuan Court. Not only Huang Jifeng but even Yu Yang also nodded. Brother Huang is right. The founder of Bishuan Court is the beacon and idol in the hearts of cultivators in Linhai City. Mo Chenga was quite interested. Fellow Taoist, can you tell me about it? Huang Jifeng said, to talk about Bishuan Court's founder, we have to start from the origin of Linhai. 100,000 years ago, the righteous path and the devil path fought a great war in the celestial pole. In the end, the devil path was defeated and moved to the north of Demonic Mountain, never setting foot in Kunwu again. The Devil Path moved to the northeast and operated in the mountain range to the north of Demonic Mountain. This part of the mountain range was covered with dense forests, undulating hills, and the terrain was complex. Coincidentally, there was such a small area in the Eastern Sea, which happened to be sandwiched between this mountain range and the Eastern Sea, becoming an isolated area. To the east was the sea, to the west was the mountain range where the Devil Path was active, and there were no roads to the north or south. The people of Linhai lived like this for tens of thousands of years, completely losing contact with other places in the celestial pole. Cultivation techniques were incomplete, resources were scarce, and there were no high-level cultivators. Even if there were very talented people, it was very difficult for them to achieve anything. Even pill concocting and tool refining were slowly lost. Occasionally, some cultivators accidentally came to Linhai and passed down some cultivation techniques and the Tao of pill concocting and tool refining. Huang Jifeng took a sip of tea, then went on to say, about 10,000 years ago, a female cultivator also accidentally came here. Unlike those people, her cultivation level was very high. She was a nascent soul cultivator. At that time, even foundation building cultivators were rarely seen in Linhai. There were only one or two of them left. A nascent soul cultivator suddenly came, so all the cultivators in Linhai naturally respected her. That was Bishuan Court's Grandmaster, Primordial Lady Bishui. We said Primordial Lady Bishui was amazing not because she established Bishuan Court here. With her identity as a nascent soul cultivator, it was too easy for her to establish a cultivation group here. What was amazing about her was that not only did she establish a cultivation group, but she also established Linhai Town and even built a transporting formation, allowing us people in Linhai to finally go to other places in the celestial pole through the transporting formation. Correct. Wei Ziming nodded. The reason why it's a cultivation group for female cultivators is because Primordial Lady Bishui rescued a group of female cultivators who were used as human furnaces by Kunwu cultivators and established Bishuan Court with them. I see. Emo Chenga muttered. No wonder female cultivators were respected in Bishuan Court while male cultivators had low status. So there was actually such a reason. That being the case, not only was Primordial Lady Bishui worthy of admiration, but the other Bishuan Court disciples also weren't domineering. Their seniors were once used as human furnaces by male cultivators, so they naturally didn't treat male cultivators well. Thinking up to this point, Mo Chenga even felt a bit of admiration. It really wasn't easy for these female cultivators to become independent. Chapter 192. After she finished listening to Wei Ziming and the others, Mo Chenga asked for a room in Azure Cloud Building. When the manager of Azure Cloud Building heard she wanted to stay here for the time being, he even prepared a small courtyard for her. Obviously, cultivators enjoyed a lot of benefits in Linhai Town. Because of this, Mo Chenga felt her previous deduction was a bit rash. Although Bishuan Court was powerful and controlled non-sect individual cultivators, it also gave them a lot of benefits. In any case, the terrain here was special, so it wasn't up to a foreign cultivator like her to judge Bishuan Court's actions. Originally, the three of them competed to invite her to their clans as a guest, but Mo Chenga politely declined. She wanted to leave Linhai Town as soon as possible and return to Kunwu. It was better not to get involved with the clans here. Bishuan Court was powerful here, so it would be troublesome if she violated their taboo. Through Wei Ziming and the others' conversation, Mo Chenga gained a general understanding of Linhai's situation. According to them, Linhai Town was Bishuan Court's world. Cultivators in Linhai couldn't bypass Bishuan Court no matter what they wanted to do. For Mo Chenga, as long as Bishuan Court controlled the only transporting formation connected to the outside world in Linhai, they would always have to deal with them. However, she had to think carefully about how to deal with them. Wei Ziming and the others once said that in the beginning, Bishuan Court's transporting formation wasn't limited to its own disciples. If individual cultivators wanted to use it, they could use it as long as they paid enough spirit stones or other valuables. Linhai had been isolated from the outside world for generations, so it lacked spirit stones and valuables. Individual cultivators often had to use all their savings to use the transporting formation. However, no one objected to this because the transporting formation itself consumed a lot of spirit stones. If they didn't accept valuables, Bishuan Court would simply suffer a loss. Later on, Bishuan Court started asking for more and more valuables until no individual cultivator could afford it. From then on, the transporting formation became Bishuan Court's exclusive use. Up to now, if individual cultivators wanted to use it again, Bichuan Court would offer a sky-high price to make those individual cultivators retreat. After learning about this, Mo Tiange had several ideas. The first method was to directly state her identity. With Xianqing School's name, Bichuan Court would presumably have to give them some face. Nevertheless, Bichuan Court was different from cultivation groups in Kunwu after all. Linhai's terrain was special, so they were the only group in Linhai. Even if Xianqing School became the #1 cultivation group in the Celestial Pole, it still wouldn't affect them. The second possibility was just like Wei Ziming and the others said, Bichuan Court saw her cultivation level was pretty good, so they'd probably try to recruit her. At that time, when she became a disciple of Bichuan Court, she'd naturally be able to request to use the transporting formation. But if she did that, she'd inevitably made a simple matter complicated. She originally just wanted to borrow the transporting formation, but in the end, it became a deception. If people from Bichuan Court found out about this, not only would they refuse to lend her the transporting formation, but they might even kill her to vent their anger. There was a third method. They said that there had been a small number of foreign cultivators who accidentally came to Linhai. If they were male cultivators, it would be more troublesome, but as for female cultivators, they would either be recruited or pay a certain price to be teleported away. She might as well act like she did just now, claiming to be an individual cultivator and saying she was willing to pay the price to borrow Bichuan Court's path. She thought for a long time but still couldn't decide which method to use. All of a sudden, she changed her mind and couldn't help but laugh. In fact, this was only a very simple matter. Why did she think it was so complicated? Aside from Yen Ruoshu and her two companions, she basically had nothing to do with Bichuan Court. Yen Ruoshu and her two companions dying in Ziwei's Immortal's cave wasn't her responsibility. In other words, she had no enmity with Bichuan Court, so she didn't have to worry about them making things difficult for her. Regardless of whether she was a Xianqing School disciple or an individual cultivator, Bichuan Court was a cultivation group for female cultivators. Judging from the tone of Wei Ziming and the others, they wouldn't be too harsh on female cultivators who didn't belong to their group. She could just openly tell them the truth. Why did she have to rack her brain to think of a foolproof excuse? In the end, she'd encountered too many problems, so she always wanted to avoid danger and ended up going headfirst into a dead end. How could there be foolproof things in this world? She was still a human now, not an immortal, and she wasn't even a high-level cultivator. She couldn't even sense the mandate of heaven. She also wasn't smart enough to take every possibility into account. She just had to be careful when handling things, but it was basically impossible to avoid all risks. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange already made her decision. Since she had no choice but to go through Bichuan Court, she'd better go and ask for help. In addition, in Ziwei's Immortal's cave, she and Taoist Fangjing once divided the dead people's belongings. Among them were Yen Ruoshu's and her two companions' belongings. She had to hide them well when she went to Bichuan Court. The less trouble, the better. This kind of adventuring together couldn't be explained clearly, so it was better not to talk about it. After resting in Blue Cloud Building for a day, the next day, Mo Tiange went to Bichuan Court's shop in Linhai Town, Blue Water Pavilion, according to the shopkeeper's directions. Mo Tiange stepped into this small shop, which looked completely the same as Immortal's shop, and her gaze swept over the shop. This shop wasn't big, it only had 2 storefronts. However, although it was small, it had everything it needed. Cultivation techniques, medicinal pills, spirit tools and materials all had counters for sale. There was even a place to receive goods. The people guarding the counters were all low-level aura refining cultivators. Mo Tiange noticed that all of them were male cultivators. Upon seeing her entering the shop, the low-level cultivators guarding the shop were all dumbfounded. However, someone quickly regained his composure and came to greet her. "This, senior?" This time, Mo Tiange suppressed her cultivation level to the early stage of the foundation building realm. After all, the late stage of the foundation building realm could be considered very high. Bichuan Court only had 3 core formation cultivators in total, so the late stage of the foundation building realm might attract the attention of the core formation elders. As for the aura refining realm, if her cultivation level was too low, she might be looked down upon. Although this person called her senior, he didn't dare to confirm it, so there was a hint of bewilderment on his face. In Linhai, aside from women with poor spiritual roots and no foundation, all female cultivators with some cultivation level were Bichuan Court disciples. The female cultivator before them was in the early stage of the foundation building realm, so logically speaking, she must be a Bichuan Court disciple. However, Mo Tiange didn't have the slightest symbol of Bichuan Court on her, and they also didn't recognize Xianqing School's uniform. Mo Chenga showed a faint smile, then said to that person, "Excuse me, is this Bishuan Court's shop?" Upon hearing her question, the shop assistant promptly nodded, then asked, "Senior, may I ask who you are?" Mo Chenga's expression was calm. "I'm a Kunwu cultivator who came here by accident. I especially came to ask to see the manager of Bishuan Court." Upon hearing what she said, the other shop assistants stopped what they were doing and stared at her. It had been a long time since cultivators from other places came to Linhai, let alone a foundation-building cultivator who could be considered a high-level cultivator to them. Upon hearing what she said, the shop assistant who received her hurriedly said, "I see. Senior, please wait here for a moment. I'll immediately ask the manager to come out and see you." Mo Chenga nodded with a smile. "Thank you." Perhaps it was because her cultivation level was high enough, or perhaps it was because her attitude was amiable, but after the shop assistant asked her to take a seat, he dashed into the back hall. Before long, a middle-aged man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm hurriedly came out behind the shop assistant. The middle-aged man immediately saw Mo Chenga sitting on the guest seat. He immediately walked towards her and said respectfully, "I'm Luo Qianshan, manager of Bishuan Water Pavilion. Greetings to Senior." Mo Chenga stood up and saluted him back. "Manager Luo doesn't need to be too polite. My name is Yi Xiaotian, and I'm a cultivator from Kunwu. I came here by accident and heard that your school has a transporting formation to leave, so I came to see you." Manager Luo had already learned the reason from the shop assistant. Originally, this wasn't a big deal. Although Linhai was isolated from the rest of the world, from time to time, foreign cultivators still came here by accident through various methods. Generally speaking, they just needed to report it to the school. Whether they could leave or not depended on whether the school was willing to lend them the transporting formation. However, the person in front of him wasn't only a female cultivator, but also a foundation-building cultivator. In a small place like Linhai, a foundation-building cultivator was already a high-level cultivator, so he didn't dare to neglect her. "So it's Senior Yi." Manager Luo still had a respectful and courteous attitude. "This is a big deal. Junior will definitely report it to the seniors of our school as soon as possible. Senior Yi, please come inside and sit for a moment." Mo Chenga nodded with a smile. "Alright, sorry for troubling you." Luo Qianshan had a very good impression of her gentle and courteous manner, so he immediately respectfully invited Mo Chenga into the inner room to serve her tea. "Senior Yi." After instructing his subordinate to report to the school, Luo Qianshan sat on the side and said, "It's been a long time since there were foreign cultivators in Linhai. May I ask why Senior came to Linhai?" Mo Chenga smiled. Apparently, Luo Qianshan came to inquire about her background, but that wasn't a big deal. Linhai was Bishuan Court's domain, so a foreign cultivator suddenly came and wanted to borrow the transporting formation. They naturally had to inquire about it. About this, to be honest, I'm also not very clear. She had already thought of an excuse for this. "I originally went to a secret place to look for some fated chances, but I don't know what happened, but that secret place suddenly collapsed. Afterward, I discovered I was in Linhai." "I see." Luo Qianshan couldn't tell whether what she said was true or false. He only felt that Mo Chenga looked calm and didn't have any suspicious points. "Judging from Senior Ye's bearing, you don't seem to be an individual cultivator. May I know which famous cultivation group in Kunwu are you?" "That's easy." Mo Chenga smiled faintly. "I'm a disciple of Xianqing School in Western Kunwu." "Xianqing School?" Luo Qianshan was horrified. He wasn't a small cultivator from one of those cultivation clans. As the manager of Bishuan Court's shop, he could come into contact with some of Bishuan Court's affairs, so he knew a lot more than them. Xianqing School was the second largest cultivation group in the Celestial Pole. Although Bishuan Court was very powerful in Linhai, it could only be considered a small cultivation group in Kunwu. It couldn't compare to a large cultivation group like Xianqing School at all. Upon hearing Mo Chenga say she was a cultivator from Xianqing School, Luo Qianshan's gaze suddenly changed. He was a bit frightened. "Senior Yi is actually a senior from Xianqing School. I'm truly sorry for not recognizing you." "Don't mention it." Mo Chenga waved her hand. "I'm just an ordinary cultivator from Xianqing School. I really can't afford to receive such a big greeting from Manager Luo." Although Mo Chenga said that, Luo Qianshan didn't dare to slight her in the slightest. His tone was polite and his attitude was respectful. Especially when he saw that Mo Chenga didn't try to hide anything and answered his questions frankly, he didn't have any doubts about her at all. Before long, the shop assistant who went to deliver the news came back and reported. As expected, the manager of Bichuan Court was willing to see her. Mo Chinga secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Up until now there hadn't been any abnormalities. She hoped the manager of Bichuan Court could smoothly lend her the transporting formation. Chapter 193. When Mo Chinga walked out of Bishui Pavilion, a carriage was already waiting outside. Once Mo Chinga got on the carriage, Luo Qinshan respectfully saw her off. "Senior Yi, a senior from my group is already waiting for you at the gate. Senior only needs to go, someone will receive you." In the car, Mo Chinga thanked him. "Thank you, Manager Luo." "Thank you." Luo Qinshan hastily returned her greeting. Soon after, the coachman cracked his whip, causing the horses to neigh and the carriage to move. Mo Chinga, who was inside the carriage, let down the curtain. She took advantage of the time the carriage was moving to enter a meditative state. She didn't bother to remember the route the carriage took. Up until now, Bichuan Court didn't seem to have malicious intentions towards her. If they did, there was absolutely no need for them to send a carriage to pick her up. Aside from expressing caution, this kind of secular method had no other use. After she entered a meditative state, about an hour passed by quickly and the carriage stopped. The coachman, who was also an aura refining cultivator, said respectfully from outside, "Senior Yi, our group has arrived. Please get off the carriage." Mo Chinga opened her eyes. At that moment, someone had already lifted the curtain. "Senior, please get off the carriage." It was a handsome youngster with a respectful attitude. Judging from his clothes, he seemed to be a part-time disciple, just like the coachman. Once Mo Chinga got off the carriage, she immediately saw the Jade steps, the lofty monastery gate, and the two female aura refining cultivators waiting on the side. These two female aura refining cultivators were different from the coachman and the youngster who lifted the curtain. Their cultivation levels were relatively high. One was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, while the other was in the 8th layer. They didn't have the slightest bit of humility, and their clothes were relatively gorgeous with the same group's emblem on their sleeves and lapels. Mo Chinga noticed that the clothes of these two female cultivators were very similar to Yen Ruoshu's group of 3 whom she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. Their emblems were also the same. Upon seeing her getting off the carriage, the two female cultivators walked towards her with smiles on their faces. "Are you Senior Yi? We're Bichuan Court's guest-receiving disciples. Greetings to Senior Yi." Since she was in Bichuan Court's territory, Mo Chinga politely returned their greetings. "Mrs. You're too polite. I'm Yi Xiaotian." She keenly noticed that the two female cultivators seemed to be evaluating her. They looked at her and finally smiled at each other as if they were satisfied. One of them said, "We've already reported Senior Ye's origin to the sect's elders. The sect leader heard that there's another guest from outside, and it's a foundation building senior, so he specifically ordered us to welcome Senior here." "Oh." Mo Chinga raised her brows, feeling a bit surprised. Another person continued, "The sect master is waiting for Senior. Please follow us." "Your sect head wants to see me?" Mo Chinga was astonished. Right now, she was suppressing her cultivation level to the early stage of the foundation building realm. With the spirit concealing pendants effect, core formation cultivators wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities, so she wasn't afraid the sect head of Bichuan Court would discover anything. However, she was a foreign cultivator and her cultivation level was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm. Was it necessary for the sect leader to meet her? On second thought, she felt she didn't need to be nervous. Maybe it was because foreign cultivators were too rare and she was a female cultivator, so the sect head of Bichuan Court was interested in her. Exactly. After the female cultivator finished speaking, she turned around and cast a glance at the youngster who lifted the curtain. "Go inform the sect head that our honored guest has arrived." Mo Chinga discovered that both the coachman and the youngster were extremely respectful in front of these two female cultivators. If this was Kunwu, she'd only think they didn't dare to show the slightest bit of disrespect because these two female cultivators had relatively high statuses. However, she'd already inquired about Bichuan Court and learned that female cultivators were respected. She also noticed that in Bichuan Court, those who did chores and had low statuses were all male cultivators. After instructing the youngster to go inform the sect head of Bichuan Court, the two female cultivators politely led the way. "Senior Yi, please." Mo Chinga nodded. "Thank you for your trouble." She then followed the two of them up the stairs. Bichuan Court's monastery wasn't any different from the cultivation groups in Kunwu. Its spirit veins were also very ordinary. Of course, this was also because Mo Chenga's horizons were much higher now. Mount Taikang was a top-notch spiritual mountain while Bishuan Court was only located in a remote corner. How could it compare to Kunwa's top-notch spirit veins? However, although Bishuan Court's imposing manner was lacking, it was very exquisite. Once they climbed the Jade steps and entered the monastery, they saw pavilions, terraces, mansions, ponds and waterside pavilions. All of them were exquisite, elegant and beautiful. Presumably, women were meticulous and dexterous, so their arrangements were better than men's. Mo Chenga followed the two female cultivators and walked for about the time it took to drink a cup of tea before they arrived at a main hall. The two female cultivators guarding the door were also in the 8th or 9th layer. Upon seeing Mo Chenga and Mo Chenga walking over, they bowed and said, "Junior Martial Sisters, you've worked hard. Is this Senior Yi?" Mo Chenga raised her hand. "Yes." The two of them smiled and said, "Senior Yi, the sect head is already waiting. Please come in." Mo Chenga nodded to express her thanks, then stepped into the main hall. However, the moment she stepped into the main hall, Mo Chenga was stunned. It wasn't because there was anything unusual about this main hall, but because there was only a middle-stage foundation building female cultivator sitting on the main seat. This female cultivator was about 27 or 28 years old. She wore gorgeous clothes and looked very charming. At first glance, she could tell she was a woman who was good at dancing. Mo Chenga was hesitant. The Bishuan court disciple who led her and said their sect head was waiting here, but why was there only this foundation-building female cultivator? For a moment she didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the moment this female cultivator saw her, she stood up first, then said with a smile, "Are you fellow Taoist Yi?" Although Mo Chenga was hesitant, she didn't show it on her face. She just raised her hand to greet her. "Yes, I'm Yi Xiaotian. Greetings to fellow Taoist." Upon hearing her name, the female cultivator also returned her greeting, then said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yi is too polite. My name is Wei Haolan, and I'm the sect head of Bishuan Court." "You're the sect head of Bishuan Court?" Mo Chenga blurted out in surprise. She originally thought the sect head would be a core formation cultivator, so she was puzzled as to why a core formation cultivator wanted to see her. She never expected it to be a foundation building cultivator. Once she said that, Mo Chenga immediately realized she was being a bit rude, so she hastily greeted her again. "I'm sorry, sect head Wei. I was being rude." Wei Haolan didn't seem to mind. She showed a faint smile, then stepped forward to help Mo Chenga up. "I heard from my disciples that fellow Taoist Yi is a brilliant disciple of Shenqing School, a large cultivation group in the Celestial Pole. Presumably, your vision is also extraordinary. You never expected Bishuan Court would actually have a foundation-building disciple as the sect head, right? This can't be considered rude at all." This sect head Wei was gentle and amiable. Mo Chenga secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She was originally worried Bishuan Court was too powerful and was used to being overbearing, but it seemed this sect head Wei was also a smart person. She treated guests with enough respect. After the two of them exchanged some pleasantries, Mo Chenga finally sat down in the guest seat. Soon after, an attendant served them tea. It was still a low-priced male cultivator. Apparently, in this Bishuan court, women were indeed superior to men. Mo Chenga thought to herself. She was used to seeing those people in Kunwu always treating female cultivators as human furnaces, so she was truly carefree in Bishuan court. "Fellow Taoist Yi." Wei Haolan symbolically took a sip of tea, then said to Mo Chenga with a smile, "Our Linhai town hasn't had any foreign cultivators for many years. May I know what kind of fortuitous encounter fellow Taoist Yi had? How did you come to Linhai town?" Upon hearing the question, Mo Chenga put down her teacup, then answered, "To be honest, sect head Wei, several months ago, I was ordered by my master to leave the mountain to travel. I happened to run into several fellow Taoists, so we went to a secret place to look for treasures. Unexpectedly, while we were looking for treasures, that secret place suddenly collapsed. I don't know what happened, but when I woke up, I was already in Linhai." Wei Haolan was puzzled. "Is that so?" "Correct. As for how I came here, even I don't know, so I don't know where to start." Upon seeing Mo Chenga's bewildered expression, Wei Haolan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Yi, it's already very fortunate that you were able to preserve your life and didn't suffer any serious injuries. Our Linhai is isolated from the rest of the world. In the past few years, foreign cultivators occasionally came here, but many of them suffered serious injuries and even lost their lives. There are all kinds of strange things in this world. We're still just beginners on the path to immortality, so there are some things we still can't understand. That's right. Mo Chinga carefully thought about why she came to Linhai. The scenery of the land of hiding dragon changed every year. According to her speculation, there was probably some kind of secret technique hidden there. Every year it would attract a place to move to the land of hiding dragon, and the next year it would change again. This time it was very coincidental that she was transferred to Linhai. After putting this matter aside, Mo Chinga pondered for a moment, then simply asked frankly, "Sect head Wei, I heard in Linhai town, only your group has a transporting formation that connects to the outside world. Is that true?" Wei Haolan nodded. Yes. Mo Chinga was delighted. She stood up and raised her hand. "That being the case, I'd like to borrow your group's transporting formation. Is that possible?" She paused for a moment, then added, "Of course, I'll give you some property as a fee for using the transporting formation." Wei Haolan didn't answer right away. Instead, she leisurely took a sip of tea, then said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, he doesn't need to be so polite. This matter of borrowing the transporting formation can be discussed." Although she said it could be discussed, Wei Haolan didn't continue. Instead, she picked up her teacup and continued to slowly drink her tea. Several years ago, Mo Chinga took over Shangqing Palace's affairs, so she had a general understanding of these ways of communication. Seeing Wei Haolan's attitude, she had a rough idea of what to do. It seemed this Wei Haolan was also quite skillful. She treated people kindly, but when it came to scheming, she wasn't polite at all. She didn't speak now because she had the transporting formation, so the initiative was always in her hands. If Mo Chinga wanted to borrow the transporting formation, she had to state her own conditions. Wei Haolan wouldn't agree until she was satisfied. Mo Chinga wasn't in a hurry. She imitated Wei Haolan and slowly drank her tea for a while before she put down the teacup and said faintly, "Sect head Wei, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. How about this? If your group is willing to lend me the transporting formation, I'll give you 1,000 spirit stones. What do you think?" 4 ordinary foundation building cultivators, 1,000 spirit stones was a huge sum. It was very difficult for individual cultivators to come up with this kind of money. Even for cultivation group disciples, if they weren't good at saving money, they also wouldn't be able to come up with that kind of money. After all, foundation building cultivators had a lot of income, but their expenses were also high. However, Wei Haolan only raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yi, you're worthy of being a cultivator from a big cultivation group. I'm not even willing to part with 1,000 spirit stones." Although that was what she said, Mo Chinga could also hear that she wasn't very satisfied. She pondered for a while, then said, 1,500 spirit stones. Although the transporting formation consumed a lot of spirit stones, it usually only required several mid-grade spirit stones to be used each time. In other words, several hundred spirit stones were enough. With 1,500 spirit stones, she could earn at least 1,000 spirit stones. Nevertheless, Wei Haolan still shook her head and didn't say anything. Obviously, she wasn't very satisfied with this price. Chapter 194. How could Mo Chinga not know Wei Haolan was raising the price? However, they had the transporting formation, so they had nothing to fear. She stared at Wei Haolan and said the next price, 2,000 spirit stones. Wei Haolan's gaze finally wavered, but she didn't agree immediately. Instead, she smiled at Mo Chinga and praised her. "Fellow Taoist Yi is really generous. 2,000 spirit stones to borrow the transporting formation is really generous." Mo Chinga looked at her and said faintly, "But sect head Wei doesn't like it, right?" Wei Haolan saw Mo Chinga's displeasure, but she still said with a smile, "Of course not. Although I'm the sect head, Bishuan Court is only a small cultivation group. To be honest, I can't afford 2,000 spirit stones. It's just that this transaction isn't very cost-effective for the cultivation group." Mo Chinga raised her eyebrows. "Does sect head Wei think it's cost-effective for me to hand over all my belongings in exchange for the transporting formation? I don't dare." Wei Haolan still had a faint smile on her face. She said unhurriedly, "However, as a disciple of a large cultivation group, fellow Taoist, you must be very wealthy. A small cultivation group like ours can't compare to you. 2,000 spirit stones. I'm afraid fellow Taoist, he doesn't really care." For elite disciples of large cultivation groups like her, 2,000 spirit stones indeed wasn't much. Not to mention she was now Lord Taoist Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, so her rations weren't inferior to core formation cultivators. Even Luo Fengxue, who was a core formation cultivator's favorite disciple, could afford several thousand spirit stones. Wei Haolan was worthy of being the head of a cultivation group. Although Bishuan Court wasn't a large cultivation group, she knew roughly how much the disciples of large cultivation groups had. Mo Qianga regretted confessing her cultivation group, but on second thought, if she didn't have Shenqing School as her backer, she might have extorted even more. Sect leader Wei. She pondered for a moment, then said straightforwardly, "We're not merchants, so haggling over the price is really boring. You should just give me a price. As long as I can afford it, I won't waste my breath." Wei Haolan seemed to be waiting for her to say that. She clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yi, you're a straightforward person. That being the case, I won't refuse any more." Wei Haolan paused for a moment, but she didn't directly state a price. Instead, she said slowly, "Does fellow Taoist Yi know what kind of situation Bishuan Court is in Linhai?" Mo Qianga nodded. "Since I arrived here, I've gained a rough understanding of the situation. Your school is the only cultivation group in Linhai, and it also controls the only transporting formation leading to the outside world. It can be said that your school is the most powerful. That's right, one sect dominates." Wei Haolan had a proud expression on her face as she said those words. However, after saying those words, she sighed. However, there are many hidden dangers behind the dominance of a single sect. Mo Qianga was bewildered. Your group has a core formation cultivator overseeing things, there aren't any powerful enemies on your side, and all the cultivators in Linhai are under your group's control. Where would the hidden danger come from? Wei Haolan showed a bitter smile. "Fellow Taoist Yi, you might not know this, but although Bishuan Court's development is smooth, Linhai's only so big. Our spirit veins can't be considered top-notch, and we're even more lacking in resources. Even if we don't have any strong enemies, it'll still be very difficult for us to grow." Mo Qianga was also aware of this. Zhengfa sect, one of the 7 great cultivation groups, was also facing this problem. The size of a sect's territory was the fundamental problem that restricted its development. Aside from moving, there was no other way to solve this problem. But on the other hand, with Linhai's special terrain, Bishuan Court basically didn't have to worry about anything if it didn't vainly try to grow. They had exclusive access to resources, and the whole of Linhai was their world. Even though their population was small, it was still possible for them to train a few cultivators. Accepting disciples was easy, so all the cultivators in Linhai racked their brains to enter Bishuan Court. The same was true for male cultivators. With manpower and wealth, as long as they didn't make any stupid moves, the group would be able to develop steadily. In other words, given the current scale of the group, being the sect head of Bishuan Court was the best choice. Seeing as Mo Qianga didn't respond, Wei Haolan could only continue to say, "Of course, in the beginning, Bishuan Court was nothing more than a shelter for a group of women who had a hard life, given by the sect's founder. We didn't want to be like those big cultivation groups who wanted to develop their influence and train many high-level disciples. But in any case, if Bishuan Court wants to pass on its legacy, some things are indispensable." Mo Qianga nodded. "So, what does sect head Wei want from me?" Mo Qianga wasn't an idiot. Wei Haolan's words definitely meant she wanted to exchange some resources from her, perhaps medicinal pills or magic tools. Seeing as Mo Qianga understood what she meant, Wei Haolan didn't beat around the bush and said bluntly, "Fellow Taoist Yi came from Kunwu. Kunwu is rich in cultivation resources, so presumably fellow Taoist Yi doesn't lack medicinal pills and materials." Mo Qianga held the teacup and smiled. "I beg to differ, sect head Wei. There's no cultivator who doesn't lack medicinal pills and materials. The current era isn't like the distant past era where spiritual objects were everywhere. Although Kunwu is rich in resources, it's still a lot more people." "That may be the case, but it's much better than Linhai." Wei Haolan didn't feel displeased. She looked at Mo Qianga and said with a stern expression, "Fellow Taoist Yi, although we don't have many spirit stones, we can still find spirit stone veins in Linhai. However, Linhai and Kunwu have been separated for too long. Although we often send disciples to study outside, our pill concocting and tool refining skills have been declining, and we're short of resources. If fellow Taoist Yi wants to borrow the transporting formation, you can use medicinal pills and materials to exchange for them. You can also use pill concocting and tool refining skills." At this point, Wei Haolan finally stated her real price. After revealing her trump card, she stared at Mo Qianga. Although the initiative was in her hands, she also urgently needed these things. Upon hearing what Wei Haolan said, Mo Chinga put down her teacup and tapped her fingers on the table as if she was thinking. Upon seeing her like this, Wei Haolan asked again, "Fellow Taoist Yi, these are still within your means, right?" Mo Chinga glanced at her then nodded. "Sect head Wei, I like to be frank, so I'll be frank with you. I don't have many tool refining materials on me, so I'm afraid I can't exchange them with you. My tool refining skills are also mediocre, so I can't teach you anything. But as for medicinal pills, I do have some on me. I also found some spiritual plants during this trip, and I can also take out some common pill recipes. I just don't know if Sect Head Wei will be satisfied with them." Wei Haolan looked delighted. It seems fellow Taoist Yi is proficient in pill concocting. To be honest, we can buy common spiritual plants and pill recipes, but the art of pill concocting really isn't easy to learn. If fellow Taoist Yi can teach our disciples how to concoct medicinal pills, I'll save you the transporting formation fee. In addition, if fellow Taoist Yi has high-grade medicinal pills, we're willing to exchange them with specialties from the Eastern Sea. Is that so? Mo Chinga was somewhat tempted. I do have some pill concocting skills, but I don't know if Sect Head Wei will be satisfied with them. Wei Haolan smiled. Whether you're satisfied or not, you'll know once you try. Mo Chinga pondered for a while then nodded. All right. Now that they'd more or less reached an agreement, Mo Chinga followed Wei Haolan to Bichuan Court's concocting room. Although Bichuan Court was a small cultivation group, its concocting room wasn't small. It occupied an entire main hall. Upon entering the concocting building, Mo Chinga saw about 7 or 8 pill furnaces inside. In front of each pill furnace were several busy female disciples, and there were also some low-level male cultivators assisting them. Mo Chinga swept her gaze over them. These female disciples were all in the aura refining realm, but their pill concocting techniques seemed very unskilled. Even the better ones could barely concoct early-stage foundation-building medicinal pills like soul-strengthening pills. Mo Chinga shook her head inwardly. No wonder Wei Haolan was in such a hurry. This kind of pill concocting level simply wasn't good enough for a cultivation group with more than 1,000 disciples. She reckoned the failure rate of concocting foundation-building pills was very high, and soul-strengthening pills were the only foundation-building pills. It wasn't easy for disciples to build their foundation, and cultivating after they built their foundation was even harder. Once the two of them entered the concocting room, a disciple immediately came to greet them. Sect Head. Wei Haolan nodded then asked, "Is your martial uncle Xia here?" The disciple answered, "Sect Head, martial uncle Xia is concocting pills in the inner room." Has it started? Not yet. After thinking for a moment, the disciple added, "If Sect Head wants to see martial uncle Xia, it's not too late if you go now. Martial uncle Xia is heating up the furnace, she'll be concocting pills in a moment." Wei Haolan nodded then said to Mo Chinga, "Fellow Taoist Yi, my junior martial sister Xia Qing is the #1 expert in concocting pills in the group. She's currently concocting a furnace of soul-solidifying pills. Let's go and take a look." Soul-solidifying pills were basic medicinal pills taken by core formation cultivators. Based on what Wei Haolan said, this Xia Qing should be a foundation-building female cultivator, so it wasn't easy for her to concoct medicinal pills for the core formation realm. Apparently, Mo Chinga still underestimated Bichuan Court. A concocting master at this level should be able to support a small or medium-sized cultivation group like Bichuan Court. However, Mo Chinga's pill concocting skills were no longer the same as before. Now that she had a lot of spiritual plants in her virtual sky world to waste, her pill concocting skills also improved in a straight line. For her, concocting soul-solidifying pills was very easy. The two of them walked through the hall and entered a separate concocting room. This concocting room was very spacious. There was only one huge concocting furnace inside, but there were no fewer aura refining cultivators inside than the ones in the hall outside. Mo Chinga discovered that this concocting furnace wasn't like the ones in the hall outside, which were operated by the disciples concocting pills using their Dantian real fire. Instead, this furnace used earthly fire as its concocting fire, and the earthly fire was very pure. As they walked further inside, they saw a female cultivator with slightly messy hair standing behind the huge concocting furnace. She was muttering to herself as she calculated the amount of materials. She looked so focused that it was as if she wouldn't raise her head even if the sky collapsed. Mo Chinga was a bit surprised. This female cultivator was actually in the foundation building realm. Was she Wei Haolan's junior martial sister Xia Qing? Her current appearance indeed resembled a pill concocting maniac. She didn't even raise her head to look at the two foundation building cultivators who came in. Fellow Taoist Yi, Wei Haolan said to Mo Chenga with a helpless expression. This is my junior martial sister Xia Qing. Once she starts concocting medicinal pills, she doesn't care about the heavens or the earth. Please don't take offense. Mo Chenga showed a faint smile. On the contrary, I think your junior martial sister is very respectable. Those who concentrate wholeheartedly on one thing are all very respectable. Compared to those ignorant female cultivators in Kunwu who only knew how to show off their clothes and jewelry, Mo Chenga liked the female cultivators in Bichuan court much more. Wei Haolan, for example, was smart and capable, planning for the future of her group. Xia Qing, on the other hand, was wholeheartedly devoted to concocting medicinal pills and even forgot to take care of herself. Mo Chenga had seen too many female cultivators who didn't want to make progress. She often felt sorry for their misfortune but also angry at their lack of ambition. Why did female cultivators have such a low status in the cultivation world? Sometimes status wasn't given by others, it was earned by oneself. If you didn't know how to work hard, didn't know how to fight for it, and just because others gave you a certain position, you cried and wiped the earth, was that useful? Didn't you see that in this world there were still female cultivators who formed their nascent souls and held their own? Therefore, it wasn't that female cultivators had a low status, it was just that there were too few high-level female cultivators. Chapter 195. Junior Martial Sister Xia. Wei Haolan shouted. The alchemist named Xia Qing just frowned and waved her hand impatiently. Then she continued to mutter her calculations. Wei Haolan once again felt helpless. She said to Mo Chenga, Fellow Taoist Yi, do you mind waiting for a moment? I really can't do anything to her. Mo Chenga chuckled. Concoctions masters all have some eccentricities. I'm not in a hurry. Sect head Wei, please do as you please. Wei Haolan smiled apologetically and ordered a disciple to prepare a seat. The two of them sat and chatted for a while before Xia Qing suddenly stood up and shouted, All right, start the furnace and start concocting pills. Junior Martial Sister Xia. Wei Haolan seized this opportunity and shouted again. Xia Qing finally heard her this time. Scratching her head, she turned around and asked, Oh, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, what's the matter? Her tone sounded like she was swatting away a fly. Mo Chenga couldn't help but chuckle. In fact, this Xia Qing was quite delicate and pretty. If she could tidy herself up, she could also be considered elegant and pleasant. However, she was so slovenly. Her hair was messy and her clothes were crooked. If it weren't for her temperament as an immortal cultivator, she would have been regarded as a beggar. Wei Haolan pulled Mo Chenga over. Let me introduce you. This is a cultivator from Shenqing School in Kunwu, fellow Taoist Yi Xiaotian. Xia Qing frowned. She wasn't curious about Mo Chenga's identity at all, so she just casually raised her hand and said, Greetings, fellow Taoist Yi. Without waiting for Mo Chenga to return the greeting, Mo Chenga immediately asked Wei Haolan, I'm busy here. Why did you bring people here? Mo Chenga's words were stuck in her throat, so she could only listen to what Wei Haolan had to say. Wei Haolan said, Didn't you say there's no one to compare notes with in alchemy? Fellow Taoist Yi is proficient in the art of pill concocting, so I specially invited her to discuss pill concocting techniques with you. Upon hearing what Mo Chenga said, Xia Qing's attitude immediately changed. She pulled Mo Chenga's hand incomparably affectionately. Fellow Taoist Yi, do you know how to concoct medicinal pills? Mo Chenga lowered her head to look at her hands, which had already turned gray from being stained by something. She resisted the urge to pull her hand back and answered flatly, I know a little. Just a little? Xia Qing asked. Do you know how to refine soul-solidifying pills? Did he know how to refine the heart-shielding powder? Where were the beauty pills? Or the dustless pill? Some of them. Mo Chenga discreetly pulled back her sleeves and shook them. If I have the materials I can concoct them, but the success rate isn't very high. Wow, you even know how to refine pills? Not bad. Xia Qing continued to ask. The success rate isn't very high, but how high is it? 30%? 40%? About 50%. If I'm in a good state, I can go up to 60%. With a success rate of 50% to 60%, one could already be considered a master apothecary. In the beginning, Mo Chenga wasn't very talented in pill concocting, but she had piles of spiritual plants to squander, so her success rate slowly increased. Therefore she came to a conclusion. There was no such thing as talent. If there were countless spiritual herbs to refine, most people could become pill refinement masters. 60%. Xia Qing shouted. Even Wei Haolan's eyes lit up. Come come. Xia Qing immediately pulled Mo Chenga's sleeve towards the concocting furnace. I have ready-made materials here. Try concocting a soul-solidifying pill. Mo Chenga withdrew her sleeve from Xia Qing's hand and looked at Wei Haolan. Fellow Taoist Wei, this. Wei Haolan was also very excited when she heard that Mo Chenga's success rate could reach up to 60%. She hastily said, Fellow Taoist, just try it. If you succeed, we'll lend you our transporting formation for free as long as you teach junior martial sister Xia your pill concocting secrets. Mo Chenga nodded. Okay. Concoctions masters rarely taught their pill concocting secrets to others, but Mo Chenga didn't rely on pill concocting to earn spirit stones, so she didn't have to worry about this. Besides, her pill concocting secrets were just some experiences she summarized after concocting for a long time. There was nothing special about them. Even if she taught them to Xia Qing, it would only save her some time. In any case, she found Xia Qing pleasing to the eye, so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable teaching her. Seeing that Mo Chenga agreed, Xia Qing immediately waved her hand. Bring the materials. Yes, the numerous aura-refining disciples answered and brought the spiritual plants they were responsible for. Mo Chenga skimmed through them. The materials were very ordinary. Among them, the main ingredients of soul-solidifying pill, purple slough grass and snowlingji mushroom, were only 500 years old. As for the other ingredients, needless to say, some of them were only about 100 years old. In fact, this wasn't a big deal. Soul-solidifying pill was a basic medicinal pill for core formation cultivators, so it only had two requirements for the materials. Purple slough grass and snowlingji mushroom had to be more than 500 years old, and there weren't many requirements for the other ingredients. However, the older the spiritual plant, the better the medicinal pill would be. With the materials in front of her, the efficacy of this soul-solidifying pill could only be said to be SOSO. In fact, she was the only one who thought this way. In this world, spiritual plants that were more than 1,000 years old were already hard to come by. Even core formation cultivators generally only use spiritual plants that were more than 500 years old. Who would be like her, who had a private medicinal garden where they could concoct medicinal pills as they pleased? Furthermore, almost all the spiritual plants were more than 1,000 years old. Wei Haolan, who keenly noticed Mo Chenga's slight frown, looked at the materials and asked, Fellow Taoist Yi, is there a problem with these spiritual plants? It's nothing. Mo Chenga gently shook her head. After examining all the spiritual plants, she signaled an aura-refining disciple to bring over an empty tray, put a clean cotton cloth on it, and began to take the amount she needed. She simply weighed them with her hand, then directly put them on the cotton cloth. She didn't need to weigh them at all. Very soon she finished taking several dozen portions of materials. After wiping her hands clean, she said to the aura-refining disciple holding the tray, Put them over there. Be careful not to mix them together. The aura-refining disciple complied and cautiously brought the tray over. Xia Qing came over, exhaled, and praised, Fellow Taoist Yi, let's not talk about other things, but you actually didn't need to calculate or weigh them, yet you were able to divide the amount you needed. This is something I can't do. Amazing. Mo Chenga just smiled. After concocting a lot of medicinal pills, I'll have an idea. This was the truth, there was nothing fancy about it. But then again, there were very few people like her who didn't need to worry about materials at all, so there were also very few people who could do this. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't any. Almost all great concoctions masters in Kunwu could do this, let alone great concoctions masters. They were either cultivated by cultivation groups or had great cultivation clans as their backing. From this point of view, concocting was achieved by piling up spiritual plants, but it could also be said that it was achieved by piling up spirit stones. Unfortunately, Bishuan Court was located in Linhai. Even though there was a transporting formation connecting it to Kunwu, they still weren't rich enough to buy a pile of materials and waste them. Wei Haolan's face was also filled with admiration. She thought to herself, Xianqing School isn't a pill concocting cultivation group, and this fellow Taoist Yi also doesn't look very old, but she actually has such superb concocting skills. It's clear that Kunwu is really full of talented people. It's worthy of being the Celestial Pole's cultivation holy land. After she finished preparing the materials, Mo Chenga stared at the already heated pill furnace. She muttered to herself for a while, then reached out to feel the temperature of the earth fire and the thickness of the pill furnace. This pill furnace was much thicker than the purple wooden tripod she used, and the earth fire was slightly inferior, so she had to start the furnace a bit later. She would have to constantly use her divine sense to monitor the temperature. After she finished checking everything, she cleaned her hands and said, "Open the furnace." Xia Qing, who had been impatient for a long time, hastily waved her hands. "Open the furnace. Open the furnace." With a great ant urging them from behind, these aura-refining disciples didn't dare to be negligent. They hastily arranged the materials, poured the clear spring water, then worked together to lift the furnace lid. Frankly speaking, this pill furnace was a lot worse than Mo Chenga's purple wooden tripod. After all, the purple wooden tripod was once used by a deification cultivator, so even if it was only once, it still wasn't an ordinary item. This pill furnace was just a magic tool. It couldn't even be considered a magic weapon. This wasn't strange at all. With Bichuan Court scale, they only had 3 core formation cultivators in total, and they weren't good at concocting pills, so it was naturally very difficult for them to have a top-grade pill furnace. However, this pill furnace couldn't be considered too bad. It was worth at least 100 spirit stones, which was much better than the common goods Mo Chenga used in the beginning. After she gave the order to start the furnace, Mo Chenga didn't immediately start concocting pills. Instead, she closed her eyes and meditated. Although the amount had long been divided, when she concocted pills, she still had to increase or decrease the amount according to the changes in the furnace fire, so she needed to be completely focused and couldn't be distracted in the slightest. The other 2 foundation-building cultivators and several dozen aura-refining cultivators didn't dare to make any noise. They were all used to seeing Xia Qing concocting pills. With Xia Qing's temper, if anyone dared to make even the slightest noise while she was concocting pills, they would immediately be driven out of the concocting room and demoted to a part-time disciple. The disciples who could stay here were all experienced and knew the rules very well. After she calmed down, the pill furnace was also hot enough. Mo Chenga first mixed the heavenly sunflower powder and purple slough grass, then threw them into the pill furnace and said, "Close the furnace." The several aura-refining disciples immediately followed her instructions. Mo Chenga closed her eyes and sent a strand of her divine sense into the pill furnace. She sensed the purple slough grass slowly melting into a pool of purple liquid while the heavenly sunflower powder dissolved into the purple slough grass liquid. As the temperature of the pill furnace rose, these 2 kinds of materials mixed into one. Gradually, they couldn't be separated from each other anymore and became a new substance. The temperature in the furnace was already boiling. The purple slough grass liquid quickly evaporated and gradually turned into lumps of wheel-shaped objects. Mo Chenga opened her eyes. "Open the furnace." Xia Qing didn't need to remind them again. The aura-refining disciples moved very quickly and immediately lifted the lid of the pill furnace. This time, Mo Chenga only kept a few kinds of materials and threw most of them inside. Once again she ordered them to close the pill furnace. She then sat motionlessly as if she was meditating. In the beginning, Xia Qing could still stare at the pill furnace, but she didn't dare to use her divine sense. This was because when concoctions masters concocted pills, their divine senses had to constantly pay attention to the inside of the pill furnace. If they were disturbed by other people's divine senses, they might make mistakes. Xia Qing thought the 2 of them were both in the foundation-building realm, so even if their divine senses were strong and weak, the difference wouldn't be too big, so they would be disturbed. What she didn't know was that Mo Chenga's divine sense couldn't be affected by cultivators in the same realm as her. Because she cultivated the soul-refining art, her divine sense was more tenacious than ordinary cultivators and wouldn't be easily affected. In the end, perhaps because it was time for Xia Qing to concoct pills, Xia Qing couldn't sit still anymore. However, she didn't dare to disturb Mo Chenga, so she stood up and paced left and right, occasionally gesturing at Wei Haolan. Wei Haolan couldn't understand the meaning of her gestures, so she could only nod randomly. Finally, when Xia Qing was about to lose her patience, Mo Chenga opened her eyes and ordered for the 3rd time, "Open the furnace." When the aura-refining cultivators opened the pill furnace, she first poured clear spring water, then put in the remaining spiritual plants. "Okay, cover it. You can rest now." The aura-refining cultivators waiting on the side heaved sighs of relief, but they didn't dare to make any noise. They just retreated and waited quietly. This time they waited even longer than the last time. Xia Qing couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist Yi, isn't it too long?" This time, Mo Chenga wasn't meditating, but when she heard what Xia Qing said, she just shook her head. "Rest assured." After saying that, she didn't say anything else. Xia Qing paced back and forth anxiously behind her. Mo Chenga calmly stared at the pill furnace, neither too fast nor too slow. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.